Chapter 28. The virtuous sage of heaven. The figure was blurry and illusionary. He seemed like he had been condensed from a thin mist, as if he were only a soul. However, his appearance was blurry, impossible to make out his facial features, but it was possible to roughly estimate him to be a middle-aged man from his vigorous voice. Ever since the illusionary figure appeared, Jian Chen's gaze had been fixed on him, filled with suspicion and surprise. That was because he had completely failed to sense how the figure had appeared there. Even though he was standing right before him, he was unable to detect anything with the senses of his soul. With a sweep of his senses, the space before him was empty, with no trace of anything. He resembles a soul, yet he also doesn't, Jian Chen thought. For a moment, he was truly unable to tell what form the illusionary figure before him had taken with his insight and knowledge. If he were described as a soul, then sure, there was a portion of the power of souls present. However, he was also vastly different from the form of souls Jian Chen was familiar with. He seemed to be more than a simple soul. And Jian Chen struggled to sense his strength. On the surface, he only seemed to be equivalent to God King in his soul form, yet he also seemed like he had already surpassed God King, reaching an unfathomable realm of cultivation. In short, Jian Chen felt like he was unable to see through the illusionary figure that had suddenly appeared. Virtuous sage of heaven, you are knowledgeable and insightful. The depth of your experiences is well beyond anything I can match, so please give some guidance when Kuan Tian heals his soul, the Dark Star Emperor said gently. Clearly, he held extremely great respect for the mysterious figure known as the virtuous sage of heaven before him. For once, his voice actually carried hints of respect. The great ceremony this time is far too important, while Kuan Tian is a hall master, so he occupies an important position in the ceremony. As a result, his memories must be recovered. Otherwise, I would not have been willing to disturb the virtuous sage of heaven either, the Dark Star Emperor continued. You jest, Your Majesty. Relieving Your Majesty's worries is part of my responsibilities, the virtuous sage of heaven chuckled, neither overly arrogant or overly modest. Jian Chen instead began to wonder. He had read a few records regarding the Dark Star race, and the three Vice Hallmasters had introduced many matters and people from the Dark Star race to him, but never had he heard anything along the lines of a virtuous sage of heaven. He could not help but grow doubtful. Logically speaking, there was absolutely no reason why he did not know about a person who could basically stand on equal footing to the Dark Star Emperor like the virtuous sage of heaven. Bing Yuan, Taro, and Dou Wujin would definitely tell him about such an individual. The Dark Star Emperor shifted his gaze to Jian Chen and said, Kuan Tian, apart from me, no one within the Dark Star race knows about the virtuous sage of heaven's existence. Please bear in mind to not tell anyone about how you met the virtuous sage of heaven today. Jian Chen came to an understanding and agreed in a hurry. Afterwards, he could not help but glance at the virtuous sage of heaven. He immediately began to pay special attention to him. From instincts alone, he could sense that the virtuous sage of heaven before him was anything but simple. Of course, what truly shocked him was how the existence of the virtuous sage of heaven could be hidden from the Dark Star race for all these years. He had no idea how long the virtuous sage of heaven had existed among the Dark Star race. If it had not been too long, then that would be fine, but if he had already existed since almost time immemorial, it would truly be rather terrifying. Jian Chen could not help but secretly raise his guard over this. Kuan Tian, you can begin. Ingest the pill you obtained from the 100 Saints City first. If the pill still isn't enough for you to recover, then I'll lend you a helping hand with the spiritual fluid of 9 apertures, said the virtuous sage of heaven. His voice was amiable, which made him seem highly approachable and friendly. Jian Chen hesitated slightly before asking in a slightly doubtful tone, But Your Majesty, I can see the virtuous sage of heaven should be roughly equivalent to a God King. Can a God King really provide assistance to a primordial realm expert's recovery? Or perhaps the virtuous sage of heaven is highly accomplished in the aspect of souls, possessing alarming attainments that we can only look up to? Faced with Kuan Tian's questions, the Dark Star Emperor was not confused at all, as even he was unable to accurately determine the virtuous sage of heaven's cultivation. However, the virtuous sage of heaven did indeed seem like a God King most of the time. Anyone would raise an issue with a God King telling a primordial realm expert what to do about their injuries. Kuan Tian, you mustn't underestimate the virtuous sage of heaven, much less show even the slightest disrespect towards the virtuous sage of heaven. That's because not only is the virtuous sage of heaven a great sage who has made vast contributions to our race, but he's also the person with the highest level of status and seniority in our race. Technically speaking, the virtuous sage of heaven is a senior of everyone in our race. Moreover, the virtuous sage of heaven's strength is nowhere near as simple as what you see, so you must not treat the virtuous sage of heaven as a god king. As for attainments of the soul, the virtuous sage of heaven is indeed the greatest within our race. With his guidance, your chances of recovery will increase drastically, the Dark Star Emperor explained patiently. Your Majesty, there's something I don't understand. Since the virtuous sage of heaven outranks everyone in our race right now in terms of seniority, then why does no one know about the virtuous sage of heaven despite all the time it has passed? Jian Chen asked. His vigilance towards the virtuous sage of heaven had already risen to the limit. Enough. Don't ask anything more. I still can't tell you about the details regarding the virtuous sage of heaven, as that's the greatest secret of our race. I will naturally tell you when you need to know. The Dark Star Emperor was reluctant to say anything more. Clearly, the identity of the virtuous sage of heaven was overly sensitive such that even people like the 10 Hall Masters did not know about him. Jian Chen knew he could not ask any more questions, so he simply shut up and sat down, swallowing the pill he had obtained from the Jade Pill sect. What a pity! The quality of the pill is impressive. Even in the saint's world, it's something you can't have enough of. I didn't want to waste it like this, but it looks like I don't have a choice anymore. Jian Chen was filled with helplessness as he swallowed the pill. After all, this was a pill that healed the soul, and its effects definitely surpassed the glazed fruit of scarlet blood. Even Jian Chen felt rather pained to simply waste a precious pill like that. In the saint's world, regular god-tier pills were relatively easy to obtain, but god-tier pills that could heal the soul, particularly pills that bore the presence of pure souls, were truly items that could only be obtained through luck. Virtuous Sage of Heaven, I must trouble you, the Dark Star Emperor said secretly to the Virtuous Sage of Heaven as he watched Kuan Tian enter a state of recovery. You are too kind, Your Majesty. I will do everything I can. The Virtuous Sage of Heaven also replied secretly without being overly polite or overly rude. His eyes hidden behind the mist also landed on Jian Chen's face, and his lips curled into a mysterious smile. However, even the Dark Star Emperor failed to notice his expression change, as if no one in the entire Dark Star world would know about it if he tried to hide something. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 28-29. Lurking Danger. On another side, Jian Chen ingested the God-tier pill from the Jade Pill sect before entering an oblivious state of recovery. But in reality, he did not recover at all, as he had no wounds. He had ingested the pill and entered a meditative state to put on an act. In reality, he was extremely vigilant inside, having raised his wariness to the limit already. He was not wary of the Dark Star Emperor, nor was he particularly worried the Dark Star Emperor would detect anything wrong. The Dark Star Emperor's strength was exceptional. With the strength to challenge those at higher cultivations, he possessed extraordinary battle prowess that was on par with chaotic primes of the first heavenly layer, or maybe even the second heavenly layer, but even if Jian Chen were up against an expert like him, he had complete confidence that he could retreat safely. What truly made him fearful was the Virtuous Sage of Heaven who had suddenly appeared. Especially after learning about the tip of the iceberg regarding the Virtuous Sage of Heaven's origins, his level of dread towards him had become unprecedented. That was because he could not see through the Virtuous Sage of Heaven at all. He seemed to be wrapped in a thick layer of mist, concealing himself away. Jian Chen knew that the more someone was like that, the more terrifying they would be. It went without saying that the effects of the God-tier pill the Jade Pill sect provided was extraordinary. Even without any injuries or underlying conditions to the soul, the God-tier pill could still function as a great supplement to the ingester. As the effects of the God-tier pill kicked in, Jian Chen immediately felt a refreshing sensation from his soul, as if his entire soul was undergoing a mellow purification. Not only had it become even more consolidated, but the presence of pure souls in the God-tier pill directly strengthened his soul, leading to a wondrous effect where his soul became even sturdier. As a result, Jian Chen could clearly feel his soul strengthen slightly after ingesting the God-tier pill. Even though this increase was not very substantial due to the limited quantity and quality of the pure souls, he could truly feel an increase. After all, with his current cultivation and the strength of his soul, strengthening it again was anything but easy. Yet, this pill managed to achieve that, which was more than enough to demonstrate its value. They said that the ancestor of the Jade Pill sect personally refined this pill. It truly is a god-tier pill produced in the hands of a supreme expert. Even under such strict conditions to deliver it into the Darkstar world, he still managed to refine a pill with such startling effects. If it were the Saints' world instead, the effects of the pill will definitely be even more startling. Jian Chen was secretly filled with admiration. Although he had basically scammed the Jade Pill sect with this, their ancestor truly approached perfection with his mastery over the way of alchemy. Before long, the effects of the pill gradually subsided, but the virtuous sage of heaven that Jian Chen had been secretly guarding against the entire time did not do anything. Jian Chen had not even sensed a sliver of the senses of the soul. He could not help but grow suspicious. Was the virtuous sage of heaven really someone that the Darkstar Emperor had sent to assist him? If he were supposed to provide assistance, why had he done nothing? Kuan-Tian, you can take your leave for now, the virtuous sage of heaven said all of a sudden. That immediately made Jian Chen's heart shudder as he remained in the same meditative pose, acting as if he were still in a state of recovery. In that moment, he felt a sliver of shock. That was because he had done nothing after ingesting the god-tier pill. He had remained in the same posture like a statue, yet the virtuous sage of heaven was able to detect the effects of the god-tier pill, had already subsided without even releasing the senses of his soul. How could he not be shocked? Virtuous sage of heaven, you mean? A sliver of shock appeared in the Darkstar Emperor's eyes. His gaze rested on Kuan-Tian hesitantly. He was unable to tell whether Kuan-Tian had roused either. After a moment of silence he asked, Kuan-Tian, have you recovered your memories? Jian Chen opened his eyes and did not disguise his disappointment. He stood up and clasped his fist at the Darkstar Emperor. I've disappointed your majesty. I haven't recovered my memories. The uncertainty in the Darkstar Emperor's eyes grew heavier. Kuan-Tian had not recovered. He was even prepared to use the spiritual fluid of 9 apertures, which was something rare that could greatly benefit the soul. So why did the virtuous sage of heaven send Kuan-Tian away? The virtuous sage of heaven did not give him an answer. Instead, he continued to say to Jian Chen, Kuan-Tian, you have no business here anymore. You should go for now. The Darkstar Emperor was filled with doubt, but due to his absolute trust in the virtuous sage of heaven, he followed his instructions and sent Jian Chen away. Virtuous sage of heaven, could you relieve me of my confusion? The Darkstar Emperor asked the virtuous sage of heaven after Jian Chen had left. Your Majesty, I fail to sense any damage to Kuan-Tian's soul. If that's true, then it would mean his injuries are already beyond my capabilities. Please forgive me for being unable to do anything, the virtuous sage of heaven said calmly. The Darkstar Emperor furrowed his brows firmly. No damage? If there's no damage, then why hasn't Kuan-Tian's memories recovered yet? Perhaps it's because of the Land of Soul Destruction. That's one of the forbidden zones created when the planetary beast died back then after all. As long as it touches on matters or items at the planetary beast's level, it isn't strange for it to be unexplainable, said the virtuous sage of heaven. The Darkstar Emperor nodded in agreement. He understood the Land of Soul Destruction better than anyone, as he had once remained in there for a lengthy period of time. He had been through the various dangers there a long time ago. As a result, the Darkstar Emperor believed the fact that Kuan-Tian's soul had already recovered, yet his memories were still missing, did not make absolutely no sense. After all, matters regarding the Land of Soul Destruction touched on a level that was simply too high. Virtuous sage of heaven, is there really nothing else we can do? If Kuan-Tian doesn't recover his memories, it'll definitely affect the great ceremony drastically. The Darkstar Emperor still refused to give up on even the slightest hope. After all, this would impact the great ceremony. With something that could decide the fate of the entire race at stake, he could not allow for any carelessness, much less any mistakes. The virtuous sage of heaven shook his head and said nothing else. The Darkstar Emperor could not help but sigh. Looks like all we can do is look for another way. Elsewhere, Jian Chen locked himself up in a secret room the moment he returned to the 5th Divine Hall. Within the dim room, Jian Chen shut his eyes and sat with his legs crossed. His expression was peaceful and tranquil, but in reality, his heart was like a stormy sea, kicking up great waves of shock. The various scenes he had gone through in the Darkstar Divine Hall earlier replayed through his head constantly. The mysterious virtuous sage of heaven made him feel an unprecedentedly great threat. The threat might not be tied to his life, but it did tie into his true identity. That was because he had clearly sensed that the virtuous sage of heaven had done absolutely nothing earlier. He had not even expanded a sliver of the senses of his soul, yet he was able to accurately determine that the effects of the god-tier pill had subsided in his body. To be able to achieve this meant the virtuous sage of heaven's strength had already reached an extremely terrifying level. Of course, if that were all, it was possible to interpret it as the virtuous sage of heaven possessing some other kind of special ability, allowing him to ignore the difference in cultivations and closely detect any changes regarding pills. The Dark Star Emperor had originally prepared the spiritual fluid of 9 apertures to recover Kuan Tian's memories in case the god-tier pill failed. Yet towards the end, when the effects of the pill wore off, the virtuous sage of heaven showed no intentions for Jian Chen to continue with ingesting the spiritual fluid of 9 apertures. Instead, he directly told him to leave. It was as if he were certain that even if Jian Chen ingested the spiritual fluid of 9 apertures, it would have absolutely no effect at all. In other words, the virtuous sage of heaven wanted to conserve the spiritual fluid of 9 apertures. He did not wish to see something as precious as the spiritual fluid of 9 apertures being used on Jian Chen. However, regardless of the conclusions Jian Chen had reached from these, he felt greatly threatened. He was extremely worried over whether the virtuous sage of heaven had seen through his identity or not. Or perhaps the virtuous sage of heaven had already seen through him. Various thoughts flashed through Jian Chen's head, which made him uneasy. He was not attached to this identity, but without this identity, saving Sacred Feather would become much more difficult. And he had even promised the heartless child to destroy the Dark Star race's great ceremony. Whether it was saving Sacred Feather or destroying the ceremony, his disguise as Kuan Tian would make it all much easier. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 2830. The deadline approaches. I never thought the Dark Star race would actually have someone like the virtuous sage of heaven. Looks like I need to be careful in the future. But most importantly, I don't know if the virtuous sage of heaven has seen through my identity. He shouldn't have, or he wouldn't have been so calm if he suddenly discovered the 5th Hall Master was no longer the same person as before. Jian Chen thought to himself. Back in the Dark Star Divine Hall, he had been paying attention to every single action from the virtuous sage of heaven the entire time. Now that he recalled it, the virtuous sage of heaven had remained extremely calm the entire time in the Dark Star Divine Hall. He showed no signs of any emotional reaction. The mask that Senior Mo Tianyun gave me is extraordinary. As long as I wear the mask, even Grand Primes can't see through my true identity. The mask only loses its function before peak figures who have reached the 9th heavenly layer of Grand Prime. The origins of the virtuous sage of heaven and what he's capable of might be a mystery, but it's impossible for him to be an expert like that. That's because this is the Dark Star world, a special place where chaotic primes cannot appear as of right now. Thinking up to this, Jian Chen's nervous heart finally settled down. He eased up by quite a lot. Of course, the thing that gave him the greatest confidence was still his strength. Right now within the Dark Star race, no one could threaten him apart from the Dark Star Emperor. However, after learning about the existence of the virtuous sage of heaven, Jian Chen also understood something. The Dark Star race might have been puny, but they still had a glorious past after all. Even though they had declined, they still could not be underestimated. Who knew whether there were any more special, unknown existences like the virtuous sage of heaven hiding in the Dark Star world? Who knew how many more of them existed? This made him develop a little more caution towards the Dark Star race, a race that was technically still very weak. Jian Chen had no idea that as he remained in the secret room of the 5th Divine Hall, the virtuous sage of heaven who existed as an illusionary figure stood in the imperial palace above the 10 divine halls silently like a ghost. His eyes that were hidden in the mist, such that no one could see them, were currently fixed in the direction of the 5th divine hall. His gaze seemed to be able to lock onto Jian Chen's current position with great accuracy. He actually stared straight at the location of the secret room with perfect precision. Jian Chen, oh Jian Chen. You've really run around in the Dark Star race lately, haven't you? The strange mask you brought prevents anyone in the Dark Star race from seeing through your true identity apart from me, and behaving as an amnesiac also provides a suitable cover for anything that can lead to misgivings, but you shouldn't treat the upper echelon of the Dark Star race as brainless idiots that you can simply fool around with. If it's just once or twice, then so be it, but if this becomes a habit, you will give yourself away someday. It doesn't matter if you give yourself away, but if you get in the way of my business, then you truly deserve to die. Though, you still can't die in the Dark Star world. I hope my appearance will make you raise your guard. Don't be so reckless again. Since you've chosen the identity of Kuan Tian, then you should act out the role of Kuan Tian to the end. The virtuous sage of heaven hovered in the air like a ghost. No one could discover his existence as he said with a voice that only he could hear. During the next few days, Jian Chen did not leave the fifth divine hall again. On the surface, the reason was to study high-grade God King grass as if he was currently investigating and experimenting with a method to make use of the energy in God King grass, but in reality, he was coming up with countermeasures for the various situations he could potentially encounter. The virtuous sage of heaven's existence forced Jian Chen to make early preparations for the worst-case scenario. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Today was the final deadline Jian Chen had given the 100 Saint City to gather divine crystals. 3 days have already passed. I wonder how the divine crystal gathering process has been going with the 100 Saint City. Jian Chen emerged from the secret room after 3 days. He handed the waste from the several hundred stalks of high-grade God King grass he had destroyed during the 3 days to a servant before leaving once again with Bing Yuan. The Dark Star Emperor learnt about what happened in the 100 Saint City pretty quickly. He's already been paying attention to the situation there. He might have already planted people there. Combined with the mysterious and strange virtuous sage of heaven, it looks like I need to be a little more careful in the 100 Saint City, Jian Chen thought. His visit to the Dark Star Divine Hall had made him extremely cautious. In the Pantheon Divine Hall, all the organizations stationed in the 100 Saint City had already gathered together. Everyone sat around the large discussion table silently, uneasy and nervous, which made the atmosphere of the Pantheon Divine Hall extremely heavy. A single sentence echoed through their heads, which was about the 50 places the Fifth Hall Master had offered 3 days ago. The end result of these 50 places directly made them grow more nervous and uneasy each time they looked around the table. That was because while there were not 100 organizations in the 100 Saint City, there were still around 80 to 90 of them. That also meant over a third of the organizations would not be permitted to remain in the 100 Saint City any longer. That was far too high of a rejection rate, so high that everyone present felt threatened. Has the clan still not answered? Lei Yun of the Heavenly Lightning asked the servant beside him again and again. He could be described as the most nervous and anxious person present, as basically all the prodigies from the other organizations had gathered enough divine crystals, while his Heavenly Lightning clan had remained silent the entire time. The servant shook his head. He also felt extremely uneasy. Had the Heavenly Lightning clan given up on their business in the Dark Star race already? The Fifth Hall Master arrives. At this moment, a resonant voice rang out outside the Pantheon Divine Hall. The prodigies seated around the table all leapt to their feet. They all bowed sternly and solemnly towards the Fifth Hall Master at exactly the same time as he strode in. Jian Chen directly made his way over to the seat of honor and sat down, while Bing Yuan stood to one side silently. However, his eyes shone slightly, hiding a hint of eagerness in his gaze towards the prodigies. That was because their fifth divine hall would also run out of divine crystals too. Even though they had already purchased a large quantity of divine crystals, it was still not enough. Whether they could resolve the issue of divine crystals would all be up to today. Everyone, you must all know why I've come already. Since that's the case, I'll get right to the point. The deadline of 3 days is up. What is everyone planning to do? Jian Chen cut right to the chase as soon as he spoke, looking at everyone with brimming interest. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 2831. The places confirmed. Esteemed Hallmaster, our Greenfields clan has prepared 5 billion supreme-grade divine crystals. We hope to obtain 5 centuries of protection from you. Our Heaven sect has also prepared 5 billion supreme-grade divine crystals to offer up to you. The representatives of the various organizations had been waiting for Jian Chen to bring this up, so as soon as Jian Chen spoke, all the organizations gathered in the Pantheon Divine Hall took out their prepared space rings. Each space ring was filled with 5 billion supreme-grade divine crystals, and that only served as the bare minimum. When Jian Chen scanned around with the senses of his soul, he even discovered over 7 billion divine crystals prepared in a few space rings. That was over 2 billion more than what he had asked for. The meaning behind this additional sum was self-explanatory. However, the fact that made Jian Chen sigh was that one of these space rings with over 7 billion divine crystals happened to be from He Qianqian. Very clearly, the Heavenly Crane clan had truly attached extremely great importance to certain rare resources unique to the Dark Star world. They were unable to bring in any god-tier heavenly resources or pills that could heal the soul, nor could they pay the tremendous price that Getty demanded, 10 billion supreme-grade divine crystals per century. But the Heavenly Crane clan was actually willing to go above and beyond the required price of Jian Chen's offer, 1 billion divine crystals per century, just to earn one of the 50 spots available. As Jian Chen sighed inside, he also became rather reluctant to turn them down. After all, he was still technically a member of the Heavenly Crane clan as long as he remained in the Dark Star world. Moreover, He Qianqian had treated him quite well during the time he had spent in the Dark Star world. He had already begun treating He Qianqian as a friend. It was a pity that he had to make He Qianqian leave the Dark Star world, as that was a form of protection for her. All protective formations had been removed from the space rings, so Bing Yuan could also detect the sum of divine crystals in each space ring from Jian Chen's side. He immediately gasped because of this before becoming completely flushed. Every single organization had prepared 5 billion at the very least, with no one offering up less than 5 billion. If this was summed up across the several dozen organizations present, the amount of divine crystals present would truly reach an astronomical figure. Because of the evolution of the fruit of nurturing ways, the Dark Star race's demand for energy had increased by several dozen-fold or even over 100-fold. As a result, the entire Dark Star race experienced a severe shortage of divine crystals. If they could obtain so many divine crystals, they would definitely be able to deal with the urgent issue at hand. Jian Chen revealed a satisfied smile too. Very good, very good. Since you've all fulfilled my request in time, I will obviously uphold my word and protect 50 organizations among you. You can now place your space rings on the table, and I will choose 50 of them. As a result, all the prodigies placed their space rings onto the discussion table excitedly and uneasily. However, Jian Chen sank into his thoughts as if he was considering who to protect among them. In the end, after several seconds of hesitation, he chose the first organization. With a flick of his finger, a single space ring immediately hovered up from all the space rings on the table, arriving before him. This meant he would be accepting this space ring, and the owner of the space ring and their organization would receive 5 centuries of protection from here on out. Of course, the protection would be carried out under the name of the 5th Hall Master Kuan Tian. As for the organization that had been chosen, they all became overjoyed. Their tense hearts finally settled down. After all, there were only 50 places, and there were as many as 70 or 80 organizations gathered in the Pantheon Divine Hall. At least a third of them would be eliminated. Afterwards, Jian Chen moved faster and faster. Space rings hovered before him one by one. All the organizations that were chosen became overjoyed as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders, while the organizations that had not been chosen became more and more nervous. In particular, when Jian Chen reached 40 space rings, a few prodigies were unable to keep their composure anymore. Nervousness and worry appeared on their faces, and thin beads of sweat had even covered the foreheads of some. He Qianqian was one of them. Even her alluring face became slightly pale. The Hao family of the Prosper Plane also felt extremely unsettled. Even though the Hao family was extremely powerful and influential in the Saints' world, they still struggled to collect certain rare resources. If they lost the unique resources of the Dark Star world, it would have a similarly great impact on the nurturing of future talents for the Hao family. Very soon, the number of space rings hovering before Jian Chen reached 49. Only a single spot remained. As for the remaining third of organizations that had not been chosen, most of them had already become despaired. They all seemed like they were close to losing their wits. Finally, He Qianqian was unable to hold back her anxiety and said, "5th Hall Master, our Heavenly Crane clan has prepared 7.5 billion supreme-grade divine crystals, and this is only the first payment. A second payment will be delivered later on, so please, stop talking." The reply she received was Jian Chen's icy voice and cold glare. Jian Chen directly interrupted her, saying coldly, "I don't need you to tell me what choice I'm supposed to make." He Qianqian's expression immediately sank before paling. She shut up instantly. She had already realized that by speaking rashly, she had angered the 5th Hall Master, potentially leaving behind a bad impression in his eyes. With He Qianqian as an example, the remaining organizations that had not been chosen immediately shut their mouths obediently. They knew the fifth hall master had a short temper and was very easily angered. As a result, they all remained silent, waiting for the confirmation of the final spot eagerly and nervously. Jian Chen was clearly quite hesitant with the final spot, but he did not hesitate for too long. He finally made a decision in the end and chose the Heavens Sect. The Heavens Sect was the overlord of planet Kangmang among the 81 major planets of the Saints' world. Their strongest ancestor was the planet lord of Kangmang. Without any exaggeration, the status of the Heavens Sect was equivalent to an imperial clans on planet Kangmang. With the 50 places determined and confirmed, the chosen organizations all smiled victoriously, while those that were not had extremely ugly expressions. He Qianqian was devastated, but she was also filled with doubt at the same time. Their Heavenly Crane clan was definitely one of the organizations that provided the most divine crystals. She struggled to understand why the fifth hall master would rather choose organizations that only provided 5 billion divine crystals instead of the Heavenly Crane clan that provided over 7 billion divine crystals. Was it because I overspoke? He Qianqian asked herself. How has your Heavenly Lightning clan been going about preparing what I want? In the end, Jian Chen's gaze landed on Lei Yun of the Heavenly Lightning clan. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 2832. The deal with the seventh divine hall. Lei Yun's forehead immediately became laced with cold sweat. He said in a hurry, "Esteemed hallmaster, the pieces of jade you require are completely different from supreme-grade divine crystals. Actually, the reason why everyone present could gather so many divine crystals in merely 3 days was because none of these divine crystals came from their organizations in the Saints' world. Instead, they had been borrowed from various organizations in the remnants of the Spirits' world. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for them to offer up 5 billion supreme-grade divine crystals in 3 days. As for the jade that the Hall Master requires, I may not know their exact value, but they're definitely something extremely precious. Even our Heavenly Lightning clan does not possess something like that. The seniors of our clan only obtained it through other means. As a result, if our clan wants to gather the 30 pieces of jade that the Hall Master requires, we'll definitely need some time. I hope the senior can extend the deadline by a few days." It made sense to Jian Chen. He knew exactly how far the remnants of the Spirits' world was from the Saints' world. Even if he ignored everything else, traveling through the passageway between the remnants of the Spirits' world and the Saints' world would take quite some time. Moreover, they would still have to travel across the Saints' world that was even vaster to return to their clans. It would also take a certain period of time. Back then, the Heartless Child had brought him here. With a Heartless Child's supreme cultivation that he could only look up to, he had basically reached a terrifying realm where he could ignore spatial distances to a certain degree when he traveled. That was why the journey had not taken him too long. However, not everyone possessed the same, peak-level cultivation as the Heartless Child. As a result, getting the Heavenly Lightning clan to complete this task in 3 days was clearly rather unrealistic. Thinking up to there, Jian Chen did not urge the Heavenly Lightning clan. He said, "Then I'll give you another 7 days. In 7 days' time, whether your Heavenly Lightning clan stays or leaves will be completely up to you." Afterwards, Jian Chen mentioned a few other convenient matters with the prodigies before leaving the 100 Saint City with Bing Yuan. At the same time, he took the 50 space rings with him. Every single space ring contained at least 5 billion supreme-grade divine crystals. There were even quite a few with a surplus of a few 100 million or a billion. This was a rather colossal sum to the Dark Star race, enough to cover the shortage of the medicinal garden completely. Bing Yuan wanted to speak up by Jian Chen's side, but he faltered. He simply could not understand why his hallmaster had not accepted all the divine crystals. Was there any difference between protecting 50 organizations and protecting all of them? They could obtain over 100 billion supreme-grade divine crystals without any additional effort. Just who was willing to let such a great opportunity slip by in the Dark Star race? However, upon considering how his hallmaster had become extremely irritable under the influence of the planetary beast ever since his visit to the Two World Mountains, Bing Yuan held back his urge in the end and did not speak up. He only felt pity over all the divine crystals that had been within arm's reach. Jian Chen and Bing Yuan returned to the 5th Divine Hall. As he sat on the 5th Hall Master's throne, the light in Jian Chen's eyes flickered before looking over in the direction of the 7th Divine Hall. He released the senses of his soul and extended it towards the seventh divine hall without the slightest attempt at concealment. In the seventh divine hall, the seventh hall master Xueqi also sat boldly on his throne, hesitating over something with a frown. He had already learned about what had happened in the 100 Saint City, and he also knew that there were several dozen organizations in the 100 Saint City that Xueqi had turned down right now with over 100 billion divine crystals at hand, seeking protection. Even Xueqi struggled to keep his composure before such a tremendous sum of divine crystals. He was extremely tempted because if the seventh divine hall possessed such a sum of divine crystals, it would be more than enough to resolve the urgent issues they were facing right now. However, he had already become fearful of Xueqi. In particular, ever since the clash between Xueqi and Irvin 3 days ago, this fear became even more intense. Suddenly, Xueqi's face changed and immediately coldened. He said to the space before him coldly, "Xueqi, you've intruded upon my seventh divine hall with the senses of your soul for no good reason, so what do you want? I've come obviously to propose a deal with you." The senses of Jian Chen's soul arrived in the seventh divine hall and directly communicated with Xueqi. "A deal? What deal can we even discuss between us?" Xueqi's face was cold, and his tone was extremely icy as if he was completely unapproachable. It was true. Only conflict ever existed between their fifth and seventh divine halls. The overt and covert struggle had already continued for countless years. Never did the concept of a deal exist between the two divine halls. "Of course. I know your seventh divine hall will run out of divine crystals to support the medicinal garden in merely a few days. Once you are unable to meet the medicinal garden's demand and impact the evolution of the fruit of nurturing ways, that's not a consequence your seventh divine hall can bear," Jian Chen said at a leisurely pace. Xueqi frowned heavily and snorted coldly. "Our seventh divine hall might not have a large supply of divine crystals remaining, but it's nowhere close to the level where we can't even meet the demands of the medicinal garden. And, the organizations cooperating with our seventh divine hall have been delivering divine crystals to us daily. Our region of the medicinal garden hasn't reached the level where we need you to tell us what to do. Those divine crystals will be nowhere near enough to provide the fruit of nurturing ways with the energy it requires when it evolves. Xueqi, just stop trying to convince yourself otherwise." Jian Chen smiled faintly and said, "Though, there is an opportunity now that can relieve your seventh divine hall of all worries regarding insufficient divine crystals. From today onwards, our fifth divine hall can take full responsibility over all the divine crystals your seventh divine hall must provide to the medicinal garden until the fruit of nurturing ways truly ripens." Xueqi's eyes lit up. This time, he did not turn down Jian Chen's suggestion immediately. Instead, he sat on his throne and ruminated for a while. "In the end," he said nonchalantly, "then what kind of price do you want us to pay?" "Price? It's nothing like that. To you, it's merely the matter of a single statement. You don't need to pay anything." Jian Chen retracted the senses of his soul. As he sat on the fifth hall master's throne, he could not help but smile mysteriously. He said to Bing Yuan below, "From today onwards, the divine crystals for the region of the medicinal garden that the seventh divine hall is responsible for will be completely covered by us." What? Below, Bing Yuan was stunned. His face was filled with disbelief. At the same time, the seventh hall master issued an order. He sent the fourth heavenly layer infinite prime vice hall master, and Lai, to personally lead 2 armies of the Dark Star race to the 100 Saint City in a vigorous manner. The armies did not advance particularly quickly, so the 100 Saint City learnt about it before they had even arrived. It immediately filled the people of the city with fear. Oh no. The Dark Star race is carrying out a large-scale attack against us. This time, they're being led by a 4th heavenly layer infinite prime. They're from the 7th divine hall. We're done for. Are they planning on destroying our 100 Saint City? Don't fret. We're already under the protection of the 5th divine hall. Immediately send people to seek assistance from the 5th hall master. The protective formations of the 100 Saint City activated at full strength once again, and the entire city was on guard. At the same time, the organizations under the 5th Divine Hall's protection began sending people to the capital city to contact the 5th Divine Hall. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 2833. Revisiting the medicinal garden, the entire 100 Saint City was enveloped in a heavy atmosphere. Even the organizations under the protection of the Fifth Divine Hall were unsettled. They began to wonder whether something had actually happened among the upper echelon of the Dark Star race, which would invalidate the Fifth Divine Hall's protection. Otherwise, why would a fourth heavenly layer Infinite Prime Vice Hall Master personally lead 2 armies with him towards the 100 Saint City in an aggressive manner? With the 100 Saint City on full alert, the 2 armies Enlai led finally arrived. The armies then began to separate, forming a huge enclosure around the entire city. The organizations in the 100 Saint City all changed in expression when they saw the Dark Star race's behavior. The 2 armies had actually surrounded the 100 Saint City. They were clearly planning to round them up and prevent anyone from escaping. The current situation was extremely disadvantageous to the 100 Saint City. They were facing a fourth heavenly layer Infinite Prime after all. Before such an expert, the defensive formation of the city could only last for a few days at most. Once it ran out of energy, the 100 Saint City would collapse on itself. On the tall walls of the 100 Saint City, the prodigies all stood in a row, and the prodigy from the Jade Pill sect who had been promised eternal protection from the Fifth Hall Master was the most confident out of them all. He stood proudly as he called out, "Vice Hall Master Enlai, Hall Master Xueqi of the Fifth Divine Hall has already promised to protect us such that we won't be stigmatized or abused by any organization of the Dark Star race. However, seeing how you've encircled us with your armies, may I ask what Vice Hall Master Enlai is planning?" Enlai hovered in the air at an altitude several dozen meters higher than the walls, looking down on the city below. The commanders of the 2 armies stood politely behind him. Hearing the prodigy of the Jade Pill sect's words, a warm smile appeared on Enlai's face. He said, "You have nothing to worry about. We naturally will not touch a single hair on the organizations under the protection of the Fifth Hall Master, but not all organizations in the 100 Saint City are under the Fifth Hall Master's protection." With that, the organizations under protection immediately let out a sigh of relief, while the unprotected organizations became rather pale. They had already realized the 7th Divine Hall had mobilized such a great force clearly to target them. At this moment, Enlai's voice sounded out again. "Many of our clansmen have died to your hands. This is a grudge so great that even if we slaughter you all, it won't even nearly be enough. However, since some of you are under the protection of the Fifth Hall Master, we obviously need to show the Fifth Hall Master some respect. We won't touch you in the next 5 centuries. However, our 7th Divine Hall will never spare the others. I'll give you 3 days to consider. If you don't remove the formations in 3 days' time, then the only thing I can do is personally destroy the defensive formation. Our 7th Divine Hall will have shown sufficient respect to the 5th Hall Master too. Though, if you really force me to take personal action because of your defensive formations, then even if the 5th Hall Master comes in person, he'll have nothing to say." The 2 armies of the Dark Star race encircled the 100 Saint City for 3 only days. During the final moments before the 3rd day ended, the 100 Saint City finally removed their defensive formation. The entire city was completely vulnerable. However, when Getty led his army into the city, the organizations stationed in the 100 Saint City had already reduced by a third. Only the 51 organizations under the Fifth Hall Master's protection remained behind, while the other organizations, including the Heavenly Lightning Clan, had all pulled out already, leaving the place through the teleportation formation established in the city. Enlai had clearly been expecting this, so he was not surprised at all. He had only paid a visit to the 100 Saint City symbolically before leaving. However, before he left, he did wonder to himself, just what is Xueqi planning? His thoughts really are becoming harder and harder to grasp now. The 5th Divine Hall. Hallmaster, Vice Hallmaster Enlai of the 7th Divine Hall has already led his soldiers into the 100 Saint City, but the organizations that are not under your protection had left a long time ago, so Vice Hallmaster Enlai gained nothing. He's currently returning with his troops. A god king knelt in front of the throne with his head lowered to the ground as he said politely, "You can go." Jian Chen said gently on the throne, "Yes, Hallmaster." After his subordinate had left, Jian Chen let out a long sigh of relief and murmured to himself, "I've finally gotten them to leave. This is good. It'll reduce a lot of my worries." The 7th Divine Hall sure upholds their word. Oh, the region of the medicinal garden under the 7th Divine Hall's management has almost run out of divine crystals. The 6th Divine Hall has 2. I need to go replenish them. Afterwards, Jian Chen left through the teleportation formation to the medicinal garden without bringing anyone with him. The medicinal garden was a secret among the Dark Star race. Only primordial realm experts had a right to learn of its existence, and all the divine crystals the Dark Star race had obtained from the outsiders were for sustaining the medicinal garden. Arriving in the medicinal garden, Jian Chen discovered that basically the entire garden was drizzling. The rain was not the kind of rain that naturally formed in the atmosphere. Instead, it was completely condensed from pure energy. The current density of energy in the garden was over 100 times greater than when he had visited last time, or even more than that. Of course, the dense energy was only scattered around the edges of the medicinal garden. The closer to the center, the thinner the energy became. The center was where the fruit of nurturing ways grew. As it seemed right now, the region around the fruit of nurturing ways had already been emptied out. There was not a single shred of energy that would remain there for even a split second. It was currently in a critical phase of its evolution to a high-grade God-tier heavenly resource. The amount of energy it required when evolving was tremendous, and it also absorbed the energy at an extremely alarming rate. It had sucked the energy in the region dry a long time ago, without even leaving behind a drop to spare. Even though new energy constantly surged in from all directions, it would be sucked clean instantly. Jian Chen visited the regions under the 5th, 6th, and 7th Divine Hall's responsibility first, using up several tens of billion supreme-grade divine crystals in one go and filling the 3 regions to the brim. Only then did he stop and observe the situation of the fruit of nurturing ways from afar. An even stronger formation protected the central region where the fruit of nurturing ways grew. The Dark Star Emperor had personally assembled the formation. It was more than enough to block the attacks of 9th Heavenly Layer Infinite Primes. Of course, due to the limited supply of energy, if an expert at that level really attacked it, the formation would not be able to withstand many strikes. The fruit of nurturing ways should be close to fully ripening. It's just a pity that I can't accurately predict when it'll ripen with my ability. I just wonder whether the Heavenly Lightning Clan can provide me with the 30 pieces of jade that contain the laws of time or not. If I have those pieces of jade, when the fruit of nurturing ways ripens will be completely under my control. Jian Chen stared at the fruit of nurturing ways as his eyes blazed with undisguisable desire. Once the fruit of nurturing ways became a high-grade God-tier heavenly resource, he would definitely be able to step into the next realm after he ingested it. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 2834. Lying low. If a 9th Heavenly Layer Infinite Prime ingests a high-grade fruit of nurturing ways, they have an 80% chance at reaching Chaotic Prime. A high-grade fruit of nurturing ways is enough to produce a Chaotic Prime. Right now, the fruit of nurturing ways is at mid-grade, so it can only allow a peak God King to reach Infinite Prime. With my current realm of cultivation, I'm still quite a far bit off from Chaotic Prime. If I want to make a breakthrough with my Way of the Sword, a mid-grade fruit of nurturing ways might still not be enough. As a result, I can only wait until the fruit of nurturing ways completely reaches high grade. Only then will I have absolute confidence in breaking through. In Jian Chen's eyes, the fruit of nurturing ways that the Dark Star race had tended to for tens of millions of years was already his. A powerful formation with a warning function enveloped it, where it could alert the Dark Star Emperor immediately as soon as it was attacked or tampered with. However, it would still take time for the Dark Star Emperor to hurry over here from the capital city. Even though this would not take too long, Jian Chen could easily tear through the formation forcefully and harvest the fruit of nurturing ways before the Dark Star Emperor had arrived. Dark Star race, since you've drained Sacred Feather of his essence blood so ruthlessly, even planning on sacrificing him, don't blame me for being ruthless too, Jian Chen thought. A sliver of cold light flashed through his eyes in that moment. Afterwards, Jian Chen stopped caring about the 100 Saint City. With He Chanqian, Jin Hong, and the people of the Hao family all evacuated from the city, he was no longer concerned about it. As for the divine halls that opposed Jian Chen, they were unable to order the 100 Saint City around either, as all of the hall masters had already realized how determined Kuan Tian was to protect the 100 Saint City. Without any benefits large enough to make them lose their minds, none of them were willing to anger the 5th Hall Master over some divine crystals before becoming locked in a pointless battle to the death with the enraged 5th Hall Master. Moreover, the current Kuan Tian had already surpassed most of the Hall Masters in terms of strength. Basically no one could hold him off with absolute confidence anymore apart from the 1st Hall Master, who was at the 7th Heavenly Layer. During the next few days, Jian Chen locked himself in the secret room. He did nothing else apart from acting like he was studying the high-grade God King grass. In the past, he had demanded large quantities of high-grade God King grass from the 10 divine halls under the guise of research. In order to avoid any suspicion, he obviously had to keep up the act. Otherwise, if he held onto the God King grass and ancestral sacred earth from the 10 divine halls and did nothing, it would be as clear as day that he was running a scam. It would be very easy for him to attract suspicion. Of course, he did contact the other divine halls again for even more ancestral sacred earth. However, ancestral sacred earth was different from high-grade God King grass. High-grade God King grass could not be sold to the outsiders, and the 10 divine halls did not have much use for them either, so tossing it all to him was no loss to them. Ancestral sacred earth was different. Not only was it much more scarce than God King grass, but the 10 divine halls could often earn a tremendous sum of supreme-grade divine crystals when they sold them to the outsiders. If a few divine halls were lacking sufficient divine crystals for the medicinal garden, they could basically all exchange away some ancestral sacred earth. Bing Yuan, inform all the divine halls that I require large quantities of ancestral sacred earth to research God King grass. We'll purchase it from them at a price of 500 million supreme-grade divine crystals per tael. With no other choice, all Jian Chen could do was purchase it with divine crystals. He had only recently obtained a tremendous amount of supreme-grade divine crystals from the 100 Saint City. He was truly wealthy. Even after fulfilling the needs of the medicinal garden for 3 divine halls, he still had quite a large amount remaining. Moreover, these divine crystals only fetched an unimaginable price within the Dark Star race when they experienced a shortage of divine crystals. Once he brought them back to the Saints' world, their value would sharply decline. That was because many precious heavenly resources could not be purchased using divine crystals in the Saints' world. Basically, all of them were exchanged for with items of equal value. Ancestral sacred earth happened to be one of those precious items. Even if he could purchase them with divine crystals, they would mostly be exchanged for colored divine crystals, which were also extremely precious. Bing Yuan conveyed Jian Chen's message to the 9 other divine halls quickly. Basically all of them, apart from the 4th and 7th divine halls that were no longer bothered by the supply of energy to the medicinal garden, had exchanged some ancestral sacred earth with Jian Chen. The 7 divine halls each offered up a different amount of ancestral sacred earth, but in total, there were 35 taels. Only 35 taels? This is nowhere near enough. Looks like they value the ancestral sacred earth well beyond God King grass. Jian Chen was dissatisfied with this result, as the supply of the 5th divine hall was a catty and a half. The 7 other divine halls had only earned him 3.5 catties, which was nowhere close to what he had been expecting. Bing Yuan, tell the other divine halls that the Emperor has personally ordered for the 10 divine halls to provide full support for my research of God King grass. I need vast quantities of ancestral sacred earth for researching God King grass, so this is nowhere near enough. I'm only willing to exchange divine crystals with them in consideration of their urgent need for divine crystals for the fruit of nurturing ways. If they miss out on today, then they won't be receiving a single divine crystal if they provide ancestral sacred earth to me in the future. Don't let them miss out on such a great opportunity. The 4th and 7th divine halls too. They also have to provide me with some ancestral sacred earth. The research of God King grass is something major that has to do with the entire upper echelon of our race. No one can remain uninvolved. Everyone needs to help out. Yes, Hallmaster. I'll tell the 9 other divine halls right now. Accepting the order, Bing Yuan immediately backed away. After Bing Yuan had left, Jian Chen became rather worried as he sat in the secret room. He suddenly remembered how the Dark Star race possessed an unfathomable virtuous sage of heaven. He wondered whether his actions would attract the virtuous sage of heaven's attention. It is a little risky, but something as precious as ancestral sacred earth is worth this risk. Also, so many days have passed already, but the Dark Star Emperor remains silent. The virtuous sage of heaven is nowhere to be seen either, so they shouldn't know about my true identity, thought Jian Chen. At the same time, he made up his mind to lay low until the day of the great ceremony arrived. 2 days later, Jian Chen had exchanged for a total of 6 caddies of ancestral sacred earth from the 9 divine halls at the price of 500 million supreme-grade divine crystals for a tael. For this, he had paid out 35 billion supreme-grade divine crystals. The additional 5 billion all ended up in the 10th Hall Master Feng Shui's hands. Now the ancestral sacred earth in Jian Chen's possession had reached 7.5 caddies, which finally left Jian Chen satisfied. Of course, ancestral sacred earth and high-grade God King grass were not the only rare items within the Dark Star race. There were a few other precious materials that only the Dark Star race produced, but they paled in comparison to the ancestral sacred earth. In order to avoid suspicion, Jian Chen began to lie low after gathering enough ancestral sacred earth. He did not set his eyes on any other rare materials. The resources I've obtained are all renewable in the Dark Star race. The treasures of truly alarming value are all in the Dark Star Emperor's hands. Jian Chen looked at the ceiling. His gaze seemed to pass through the obstruction of the secret room and land on the Dark Star Divine Hall hovered above. He could clearly sense the Dark Star Emperor's presence that was as vast as the boundless ocean. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 2835. The Day of the Great Ceremony. It's only a pity that I'm still not the Dark Star Emperor's opponent with my current strength unless my way of the sword breaks through to the partial achievement of Sword Immortal. Jian Chen's eyes gradually lit up. Reaching the partial achievement of Sword Immortal was very difficult from one perspective, but it was also simple from another perspective. If he comprehended it normally, the breakthrough would obviously be riddled with difficulties. He would require fortuitous encounters, tremendous amounts of comprehension, and a steady accumulation over a lengthy period of time. However, if he possessed a high-grade God-tier fruit of nurturing ways, then going from the initial achievement to the partial achievement of Sword Immortal would become extremely easy. Looks like I have to obtain the fruit of nurturing ways regardless of the cost. In the blink of an eye, another 7 days passed by. Having spent his entire time fiddling around with God King grass in the secret room, Jian Chen finally received good news. Lei Yun of the Heavenly Lightning Clan had returned to the 100 Saint City with 30 pieces of jade with the laws of time. The 30 pieces of pure white and flawless jade were delivered to Jian Chen's hands in a box. As soon as he received the box, Jian Chen opened it eagerly. 30 pieces of jade laid in there quietly, all containing extremely pure power of the laws of time. At the first glance, Jian Chen discovered the 30 pieces of jade were exactly the same as the 3 pieces Lei Yun had initially taken out in the Pantheon Divine Hall. Even the laws of time inside were the same. Great! This is fantastic! With these pieces of jade, I can make the fruit of nurturing ways ripen whenever I want. Jian Chen secretly rejoiced. He had already prepared the energy that the fruit of nurturing ways required to evolve, and the remaining issue of time would be resolved with the 30 pieces of jade. In his eyes, the fruit of nurturing ways was already within his reach. Send a tale of ancestral sacred earth to the Heavenly Lightning Clan in the 100 Saint City. This is what I promised them. Since they've fulfilled my request, I obviously won't mistreat them. On top of that, give the Heavenly Lightning Clan 1,000 stalks of low-grade God King grass. In a fantastic mood, Jian Chen directly rewarded the Heavenly Lightning Clan with 1,000 stalks of God King grass. Time passed silently as Jian Chen waited patiently. Finally, the 10 Hall Masters all received precise news regarding the day of the Great Ceremony half a month later. The Great Ceremony was set to occur in 3 months' time. Soon after confirming the exact time of the Great Ceremony, the Dark Star Emperor summoned the 10 Hall Masters again, so the Hall Masters and Vice Hall Masters assembled in the Dark Star Divine Hall once more. The God King life-devouring beast corpses we have for the Great Ceremony is nowhere near enough. If we rely on the outsiders to hunt them down in the Two World Mountains, we don't make it in time. As a result, in order to collect enough corpses as soon as possible, I've decided to lead you all to kill our way into the Two World Mountains. The Dark Star Emperor sat on his throne like a lofty mountain as he spoke in his voice filled with an undefiable sense of dignity. The various Hall Masters and Vice Hall Masters all looked at one another. At that moment, no one knew how to react properly. With their status in the Dark Star race, they had never thought that they, the esteemed Hall Masters and Vice Hall Masters, would actually have to be mobilized and kill their way into the Two World Mountains for the sake of some measly God King life-devouring beast corpses. This was definitely the first and only case of something like this occurring throughout the history of the Dark Star race. Because the Great Ceremony this time is different from the past, not only do we need large quantities of God King life-devouring beast corpses, but we also need the corpse of a regional king life-devouring beast that has reached the primordial realm. We need to gather all these corpses within half a month, the Dark Star Emperor continued sternly and seriously, which only demonstrated he was not joking. He had truly made up his mind about leading the primordial realm experts into the two world mountains to hunt God King life-devouring beasts. As soon as they heard about the corpse of a primordial realm life-devouring beast, the Hallmasters and Vice-Hallmasters below all changed in expression. Once members of their Darkstar race entered the two world mountains, not only would their powers be heavily suppressed, preventing them from unleashing their full strength, but even leaking a sliver of their presences would immediately alarm all the life-devouring beasts in the two world mountains, leading to an encirclement. If they began fighting in the two world mountains, not only would they be suppressed, but they would not be able to recover their energy either, and their life force would be constantly devoured by the life-devouring beasts. On the other hand, the life-devouring beasts had almost endless power due to the special environment of the two world mountains blessing them, and they could recover in an extremely short amount of time from wounds no matter how severe. With these advantages and disadvantages, the strength of the two sides that originally possessed roughly equal power would obviously be pulled apart, such that the difference between the two sides basically could not be made up for. As a result, the Hallmasters and Vice-Hallmasters all became rather stern when they heard they had to enter the two world mountains to hunt life-devouring beasts. Killing a weaker regional king life-devouring beast is not too difficult for me, so leave that to me. What you need to do is do everything you can to hunt as many God King life-devouring beasts as possible, the Darkstar Emperor said relaxedly. When he mentioned killing a primordial realm life-devouring beast, his countenance had not even changed as if he was mentioning a negligible feat. However, Jian Chen knew the Darkstar Emperor did indeed possess that strength. During the last time when he entered the two world mountains, the Darkstar Emperor had already demonstrated great strength that could overwhelm everything. If he suddenly launched a sneak attack against a weaker primordial realm life-devouring beast, he could indeed kill it in one strike before retreating with ease. During the morning on the next day, Jian Chen led the 3 Vice-Hallmasters of the 5th Divine Hall to the two world mountains with all the primordial realm experts from the 9 other Divine Halls and the Darkstar Emperor. Their jobs were broken down very clearly. First, the Darkstar Emperor would draw away the attention of all the primordial realm life-devouring beast, and the remaining Hallmasters and Vice-Hallmasters would scatter and hunt down God King life-devouring beasts. Immediately, great rumbles roared out in the depths of the two world mountains and thunderous beast roar rang out constantly. The Darkstar Emperor completely erupted with his presence, making him something akin to an extremely resplendent sun in the two world mountains. He immediately attracted the attention of all the primordial realm life-devouring beasts. This time, the Darkstar Emperor did not become embroiled in a great battle with the primordial realm life-devouring beasts like last time. Instead, he used his movements techniques to maneuver through the depths of the two world mountains whilst leading the life-devouring beasts around. Just like that, he minimized the energy he exhausted, and he would obviously be able to remain for a longer time in the depths. The Hallmasters and Vice-Hallmasters all scattered throughout the depths, killing off the God King life-devouring beasts one by one as quickly as they could while minimizing any disturbances. Immediately, the number of God King life-devouring beasts in the two world mountains plummeted, and the life-devouring beasts that chased the Darkstar Emperor around everywhere were basically playing cat and mouse. Due to their limited intelligence, they were unable to immediately read the Darkstar Emperor's simple plan. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 2836. Hunting Operation. The hunting operation lasted for 7 whole days. During the 7 days, countless God King life-devouring beasts died in the depths of the two world mountains. The past few days were definitely the darkest days of the two world mountains since its creation, as the two world mountains had never lost such a tremendous number of life-devouring beasts in all the years it had existed, and they were all stronger God King life-devouring beasts. After several days of hunting, it also became more and more difficult for the experts of the 10 Divine Halls to find God King life-devouring beasts. When they first entered the two world mountains and expanded the senses of their souls at the primordial realm, they could often discover several or even many God King life-devouring beasts within the range of their senses even after shrinking from the suppression. But now, they would often have to spend a lot of time and cover a lot of ground before they ran into a living God King life-devouring beast. It was as if all the God King life-devouring beasts in the two world mountains had been hunted to extinction in 7 short days. At this moment, a lengthy bellow suddenly erupted from the depths of the two world mountains. It was the Darkstar Emperor's voice, and it truly resembled the furious howl of a chaotic prime. The terrifying sound waves possessed great penetrative power, piercing through the entire two world mountains. Hearing the Dark Star Emperor's howl, the Infinite Prime scattered in various regions of the Two World Mountains all stopped searching before flying out as quickly as they could without the slightest hesitation or doubt. The Dark Star Emperor has ordered for a retreat. Looks like he's close to his limit too. Though to be able to maneuver among so many primordial realm life-devouring beasts for so long when he can't even recover a shred of energy, the Dark Star Emperor is extremely impressive. Jian Chen gazed in the direction of the Dark Star Emperor before retreating as well. The depths of the Two World Mountains were shrouded in thick mist, and the geography would constantly change, making it extremely easy to get lost. However, to the Dark Star race, the Dark Star world served as the perfect guiding beacon of light. As a result, no matter what alarming changes the geography of the depths went through, they would never get lost. Jian Chen was not a member of the Dark Star race, so he could not sense the Dark Star world, but he had already left behind an obscure imprint outside a long time ago, so he had nothing to worry about being able to find his way out. Primordial realm experts moved extremely quickly, basically able to cover 1,000 kilometers in an instant. As a result, in a mere 4 hours, all the Hall Masters and Vice Hall Masters in the Two World Mountains had withdrawn from there, assembling in the territory of the Dark Star race. It's been a very long time since our race has carried out such a large operation. This time, surely we've killed every last God King life-devouring beast in the Two World Mountains. Yeah. Even if some manage to escape, there shouldn't be many remaining. Though I feel like having us kill these life-devouring beasts that are only God Kings with our level of strength is a little bit of an overkill. Well, there's nothing we can do about it. Due to their limited strength, it takes tremendous effort for the outsiders to kill a single God King life-devouring beast. If we want to rely on them, who knows how long it'll take before they hunt down enough. As for the God Kings of our race, they'll basically be reduced to the life-devouring beast's food once their strength has been suppressed. As a result, the only way to hunt down large quantities of God King life-devouring beasts in a short time is for us to set out personally. The primordial realm experts discussed casually together. Many of them breathed rather heavily. In particular, the weaker primordial realm experts like Bing Yuan even became slightly pale. The 7 days of hunting took different tolls on them. The weaker they were, the greater the toll was. A heavy presence rapidly approached them from the Two World Mountains. The Dark Star Emperor was the last one to emerge. His hair was messy, and there were hints of exhaustion on his face. Many parts of his clothes were tattered too. He seemed to be in a rather miserable shape. However, he was unscathed. Although everyone had left the Two World Mountains, the Two World Mountains did not settle down because of that. The life-devouring beasts had discovered that many of their clansmen in their territories had been slaughtered, so they all let out furious roars, shaking up the mountains. They rampaged about in the depths, all gathering at the boundary of the Two World Mountains in the end. Their huge eyes that shimmered in the thick mist shone with raging fury and hatred. However, they seemed to be afraid of something and refused to step out of the boundaries of the Two World Mountains. These dirty beasts aren't stupid. They know not to set foot in our territory. A Vice Hall Master sneered as he stood outside the Two World Mountains. He no longer feared the life-devouring beasts anymore after leaving the Two World Mountains. If we enter the Two World Mountains, we'll be suppressed by the will of the Grand Exalt of the Wood Spirits. However, if they dare to enter our territory, they'll also be suppressed by the will of our ancestor. Not only will their strength be limited, but even recovering from their wounds will become riddled with difficulties. By then, killing these dirty beasts will be a piece of cake for us, said another Vice Hall Master. His eyes filled with a provoking light. The Dark Star World and the Two World Mountains were better described as territories the Grand Exalts of the two races carved up in the past than two different regions. Both members of the Dark Star race and life-devouring beasts would be suppressed and experience plummeting strength if they set foot in each other's domain. If it were not for an absolute figure like the Dark Star Emperor, the current generation of the Dark Star race probably wouldn't be able to enter the Two World Mountains and kill so many God King life-devouring beasts like today. Jian Chen saw the crux of the problem. As he discovered the number of primordial realm life-devouring beasts in the Two World Mountains were roughly similar to the primordial realm experts of the Dark Star race. Even if there was a difference, it was not particularly big. It was not just quantity. This even applied to their strength. The Dark Star race had a 9th heavenly layer infinite prime, the Dark Star Emperor, while the Two World Mountains also had a 9 heavenly layer infinite prime life-devouring beast. The two of them seemed to maintain some sort of balance, yet also seemingly restraining one another. The reason why the balance would be broken was because the Dark Star Emperor was far too powerful. Despite also being a ninth heavenly layer infinite prime, he could enter the depths of the two world mountains and hold his ground against all the primordial realm life-devouring beasts alone. There was nothing the ninth heavenly layer infinite prime life-devouring beast could do to the Dark Star Emperor. But similarly, the Dark Star Emperor clearly lacked the strength to kill the ninth heavenly layer infinite prime life-devouring beast in the two world mountains. To Jian Chen, the current stalemate between the two world mountains and the Dark Star race seemed more like an extension of the hatred between the Grand Exalt of the Wood Spirits and the Grand Exalt of the Dark Star race. "Count up the life-devouring beasts and see if there's enough for the ceremony," said the Dark Star Emperor. In that moment, he seemed to become a huge vortex devouring the essence of the world, rapidly absorbing the energy in the surroundings to replenish his own at a speed that completely exceeded what a ninth heavenly layer infinite prime should have possessed. In Jian Chen's eyes, this recovery rate normally only appeared on chaotic primes. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 2837. Fear-stricken afterwards, everyone began to gather and tally the life-devouring beasts in their space rings. After a count, the several dozen primordial realm experts of the Dark Star race had killed over 50,000 God King life-devouring beasts in 7 days. On average, basically everyone had killed over 1,000. Of course, this was only an average. In reality, the Hall Masters killed the most, as not only were they the strongest, but the senses of their souls enveloped a larger region too. They possessed an advantage whether it was for searching or for hunting. The other, weaker Vice Hall Masters, such as weaker first heavenly layer infinite primes like Bing Yuan, obviously hunted down fewer life-devouring beasts. As a matter of fact, there were a few Vice Hall Masters who became no stronger than peak God King life-devouring beasts after the suppression from the two world mountains due to how weak they were. After 7 days of killing and fighting, they had received a few wounds that were not particularly heavy. Even a small fraction of their life force had been devoured. Over 50,000. That's enough, the Dark Star Emperor said in thought before bringing everyone back to the capital city of the Dark Star race. As soon as they returned to the capital city, all the Hall Masters and Vice Hall Masters, including the Dark Star Emperor, entered seclusion immediately. During the 7 days of hunting in the two world mountains, they were unable to recover any energy, which took an extremely great toll on them. They were aiming for a full recovery now. But even after leaving, the two world mountains still had not settled down. Perhaps due to losing far too many God King life-devouring beasts this time, the primordial realm life-devouring beasts of the two world mountains gathered at the boundary of the Dark Star world and refused to leave. Their colossal figures shimmered in the dense mist as they constantly let out furious roars at the outside world, striking fear into the hearts of all nearby outsiders and members of the Dark Star race, as if they were afraid these terrifying primordial realm life-devouring beasts would charge out and massacre them. This matter led to a great uproar within the Dark Star world. Members of the Dark Star race, unaware of the reason behind this, even reported these abnormal movements to the 10 divine halls fearfully. Only after 7 whole days did the primordial realm life-devouring beasts at the boundary of the two world mountains finally disperse. Very soon, the two world mountains recovered its peace again. However, on the next day after settling down, the supreme expert of the Dark Star race, the Dark Star Emperor, silently entered the depths with his presence concealed. Before long, there was a miserable howl from the depths, filled with despair and fear, like the sound produced during a final struggle before death. With the howl was the powerful presence of the Dark Star race that rapidly expanded through the two world mountains, enveloping the entire place in a single moment. Immediately, the two world mountains that had recently settled down were thrown into chaos again. The primordial realm life-devouring beasts hidden throughout let out angry roars, converging from all directions with absolute fury. However, by the time they arrived at the location of the incident, the owner of the territory had already vanished. All that was left was a ground covered in green blood. As the day of the great ceremony drew closer and closer, the entire Dark Star race became visibly busier than before. People with sharper senses would even notice that a solemn and holy atmosphere had silently enveloped the entire capital city. The day of the great ceremony required various preparations, and the Dark Star Divine Hall specially assigned people to handle them. This included constructing the altar, preparing the sacrifices, and so on. These matters could only be regarded as miscellaneous and negligible, without needing to involve the 10 divine halls. The several tens of thousand God King life-devouring beasts they had hunted had all been taken away. The people planning the ceremony would further handle them. That was not all. Even the droplets of divine beast essence blood allocated to the 10 divine halls and the various cities in the Dark Star race had been collected under the Dark Star Emperor's orders after being completely converted, set aside for the day of the great ceremony. The 100 Saint City and all the outsiders were all placed under the close supervision of the Dark Star race. Among the 10 armies of the Dark Star race, one of them was personally stationed in the 100 Saint City, containing everyone within the city and forbidding anyone from leaving. This time, as the protector of the 100 Saint City, the 5th Hall Master did not stand up for them, as this order originated from the Dark Star Emperor. Very clearly, even though it seemed impossible for the 100 Saint City and its puny strength to interfere with the great ceremony in the Dark Star Emperor's eyes, the great ceremony was far too important. He could not allow anything to go wrong during the process. The Dark Star Emperor had clearly done this to eliminate all problems that could potentially exist. Apart from the 100 Saint City, all the outsiders active in the Dark Star world had been locked up in their respective cities. The Dark Star race had basically placed them under house arrest. From now onwards until the end of the great ceremony, no outsiders were allowed to leave their cities. And the Dark Star race had even sent out many God Kings, forming patrol groups to keep watch of the entire territory of the Dark Star race. As soon as they discovered any outsiders out in the wilderness, they would forcefully imprison them in the nearby city. Anyone who refused to cooperate would be executed without mercy. The Dark Star race's actions immediately filled all the outsiders with fear. Even though the outsiders placed under house arrest could move around in their cities, none of them were at ease. They were unsettled inside, unsure about what had happened within the Dark Star race. Even the few well-informed outsiders struggled to find peace after learning about how the Dark Star race was currently preparing for a great ceremony. They were rather unsure whether the Dark Star race had placed them under house arrest to prevent them from making trouble or for some other reason. I've heard that some demonic cultivators of the saints' world will often slaughter large numbers of living creatures when they hold certain ceremonies and rituals. Surely the Dark Star race hasn't trapped us in the city one by one for these demonic purposes so that they can sacrifice all of us. As more rumors arose, combined with the various means the Dark Star race used to keep them under custody, more and more people believed the Dark Star race wanted to sacrifice them. This immediately filled all the outsiders with despair. They felt like they were done for. However, not everyone accepted their fate so willingly. As the saying went, repression led to resistance. After the Dark Star race imprisoned them like criminals, a few outsiders finally banded together and prepared for a counterattack. This immediately caused a headache for the various city lords. Most of these outsiders were not particularly powerful, with God Kings occupying an extremely small amount, but there were a lot of them. Even if they banded together, they still could not pose a threat to the force of suppression from the city, but it was still trouble. Normally, something as small like this would be no trouble at all. They could suppress the resistance with a flick of the hand, but the critical day of the great ceremony was now approaching. During these sensitive times, any factors of unpredictability could be enlarged indefinitely. The Emperor has strict orders to kill no outsiders within the city. If not for that, it's really tempting to slaughter all of these outsiders and make things right once and for all. Many city lords sighed within the 36 cities of the Dark Star race. The 7th Divine Hall responsible for handling all the matters of the race, regardless of size and importance, obviously found out about the situation of the outsiders beginning to spiral out of control in the cities. The 7th Hall Master even personally visited the Dark Star Divine Hall to see the Dark Star Emperor, proposing to slaughter all of the outsiders and remove all potential trouble for good. Getty, we can't kill the outsiders. They still have their uses. The reason why they're uneasy is all because they're worried we'll sacrifice their lives. You can pass on my word personally to all the outsiders that I, the Emperor of the Dark Star race, will promise to all of them that we, the Dark Star race, will not touch anyone's lives. All of them will leave here alive in the end. The Dark Star Emperor's flat yet dignified voice rang out. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 2838. Various arrangements. Yes, Your Majesty. Getty replied politely before immediately carrying out the Dark Star Emperor's order. Even though the Dark Star Emperor's attitude towards the outsiders left Getty doubtful, the Dark Star Emperor possessed paramount authority within the Dark Star race. As long as the Dark Star Emperor issued an order, no one dared to refute or question it. Even if they believed the Dark Star Emperor's order was a mistake, they would still carry it out. However, when the Dark Star Emperor's order that seemed more like a promise reached the outsiders locked up in the 36 major cities through the 7th Divine Hall, the nervous and uneasy outsiders immediately settled down. Even their momentum for a desperate attempt at resistance collapsed temporarily. There really had not been a lot of outsiders who questioned the Dark Star Emperor's promise. Although no one had personally seen the Dark Star Emperor so far, many of them still found the Dark Star Emperor relatively trustworthy due to his reputation. So it's all just a false alarm. It's like what I said. The Dark Star Emperor won't do anything to us, nor are they bold enough to actually harm us. After all, we basically represent half of all the organizations in the entire Saints world. If the Dark Star race really slaughters us all, the great sovereigns of our Saints world will definitely take action and annihilate the Dark Star race. That's right. If the great sovereigns of our Saints world take action, the Dark Star race won't have the slightest hope of surviving. The Dark Star race offending the 100 Saint City is already the limit. After all, the 100 Saint City is only composed of several dozen large organizations from the Saints world, but behind us are countless sects and organizations. Similar discussions occurred throughout the Dark Star race. In particular, whenever some outsiders mentioned the Great Sovereign, their faces became filled with undisguisable pride. When they glanced past the members of the Dark Star race, their eyes would be filled with faint disdain. Among these outsiders, quite a large portion were people with backgrounds in the Saints world. Even though the organizations behind them were not as great as those in 100 Saint City, there were still quite a lot of organizations with weaker Grand Primes. And there were an extremely small number of existences with backgrounds in the Saints world that completely rivaled the organizations in the 100 Saint City, or even surpassed most of them. However, these organizations had not participated in the construction of the 100 Saint City, so they obviously did not forge an alliance with the organizations behind the city. They were independent existences in the Dark Star world. As a result, while supreme existences like Grand Exalts were not commonly known by most cultivators in the Saints world, they had ceased to be some sort of secret a long time ago among some of these people. They won't touch our lives, and they guarantee all of us will leave here alive? That's a little vague. The Dark Star Emperor is playing word games with us. At the same time, the remaining 52 organizations in the 100 Saint City assembled in the Pantheon Divine Hall to discuss the current situation of the Dark Star race. Exactly right? For example, beating us up until we're half dead and tossing us out, or letting us leave with missing limbs. After all, we'll all be leaving here alive without our lives being touched. The Dark Star Emperor only said he wouldn't harm our lives, but nothing about not harming a single hair on us. That's right. Not harming our lives and not touching a single hair on us are two concepts that are worlds apart. Coupled with how the Dark Star race has imprisoned so many outsiders from the Saints world in the 36 cities and they've sealed off the teleportation formations to prevent these people from leaving, they must be hiding some ulterior motive. The many organizations analyzed in the Pantheon Divine Hall, but the speakers were not leading prodigies, but old servants who followed the prodigies. Right now, these old servants served as the wits of the various organizations to come up with plans for their young masters and mistresses. And they truly were suited for this. They were not powerful, but their brilliance was something else. They served as the wise intellectuals who managed all business with the Dark Star race for their clans. Young master, for the sake of safety, it's best if you leave the Dark Star world as soon as possible, an old servant said. One of the other major reasons that the clan sent me into the Dark Star world was so that I can temper myself through the trials I'll face. If I choose to shrink back just because of some rumors and your wild guesses, what face do I have to contend for the position of young patriarch? A prodigy said stubbornly, dignified and fearless. We have to take precautions about this. How about this? We can send people to fill the teleportation formation with energy for now so that it is available whenever. Once something we can't handle really occurs, we'll retreat as soon as possible, Lei Yun of the Heavenly Lightning Clan said. His suggestion immediately received unanimous agreement. Afterwards, they immediately sent someone to undertake a full inspection of the teleportation formation before charging its energy until it was full so that it was available for use at any time. However, unbeknownst to them all, an illusionary figure hovered high in the sky outside the barrier the defensive formations of the 100 Saint City created as they charged up the teleportation formation. He seemed to be fused with the surroundings, not only giving off absolutely no presence, but also impossible to detect with the naked eye. Even if someone glanced past this figure with their eyes absent-mindedly, they would only find thin air. They would not detect anything at all. At this moment, the figure looked down on the 100 Saint City from above and spoke with a murmur only he could hear. When I saved you in the 100 Saint City back then, I was counting on you to be of some use during crucial moments of the great ceremony. If I simply let you all leave safely, wouldn't my efforts all be a waste? As he said that, the illusionary figure clicked his finger at the 100 Saint City below. An extremely weak and obscure energy shot out in that moment, right into the 100 Saint City. The powerful formations that the 100 Saint City took pride in seemed like they did not exist at all before the weak and obscure energy. They were unable to obstruct it at all, allowing the strand of energy to pass through the formations and enter the 100 Saint City in complete secrecy. In the end, it vanished into the only teleportation formation within the 100 Saint City. Nothing happened to the teleportation formation. It continued to function as normal, except there was a strand of energy that no one could detect within it. Only success is permitted for the operation this time. Even with my pawn embedded among the upper echelon of the Dark Star race, Jian Chen, I still need to prepare multiple backup plans. The trump card of the 100 Saint City has never been used in the Dark Star world. It's about time for it to demonstrate its power. It combines everyone's power in the 100 Saint City before the countless formations in the 100 Saint City amplify it and the tremendous energy reserve hidden deep beneath the city to form an ultimate attack on par with chaotic primes. When this strike is launched at the location of the great ceremony from so far away, its power will decrease slightly, but it'll still be able to impact the great ceremony to a certain degree. The strike might not be able to completely ruin the ceremony with the Dark Star Emperor's presence, but it can cover Jian Chen a little when it matters. Jian Chen, you better not let down my expectations of you. If you fail as well, then all I can do is use my final move. It's just that I really don't want to use this final move, or not only will my second soul disintegrate under the power of the blood oath, but even my original body in the saint's world will be heavily injured. Although I've already prepared countless different methods to obstruct and weaken the power of the blood oath, that's still the power that belongs to the Grand Exalt of the Dark Star race after all. Even though the Grand Exalt is already dead, no one in the current day and age can withstand the backlash from the power of the blood oath apart from the Wind Venerable. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 2839. The Virtuous Sages of Heaven and Earth. Within the quiet murmurs, the figure that hovered outside the protective formations of the Hungry Saint City gradually vanished. He had already left the place with unfathomable speed. In the moment before, he was still near the 100 Saint City, but in the next moment, he had already appeared in the capital city of the Dark Star race that was extremely distant from the 100 Saint City. He did not use the laws of space, but he surpassed the laws of space. He had basically covered billions of kilometers in a single breath. Even Jian Chen, who comprehended the laws of space and had reached the primordial realm with them, was nowhere close to such speed. At the same time, the Dark Star Emperor hovered above his throne with his eyes closed in the Dark Star Divine Hall above the capital city. He was currently using the senses of his soul to observe the situation of the Dark Star race. At this moment, the illusionary figure appeared silently in the Dark Star Divine Hall. Without touching the ground, he hovered in the Divine Hall at an altitude that was a head lower than the Dark Star Emperor. The Dark Star Emperor seemed to sense something. He opened his eyes and gazed at this illusionary figure that had arrived so elusively and showed a hint of respect for once. He said, "Virtuous Sage of Heaven, now that the day of the great ceremony grows closer, may I ask how much confidence you have in success?" The Virtuous Sage of Heaven sank into his thoughts momentarily and said slowly, "Originally, the chances of success were 50% at most, with an equal possibility of succeeding and failing, which would completely be up to chance in the end. However, now that we have the Divine Beast's blood, the chances of success have increased drastically. My estimation is that the chances of success have reached as high as 80 or 90%. 80 or 90%. In other words, success is basically guaranteed for the ceremony this time." The Dark Star Emperor let out a long sigh. He was filled with indescribable joy. A success rate as high as 80 or 90% left a very slim chance of failure. That should be the case, but please bear in mind that nothing is absolute, Your Majesty. Even if it seems like we have a success rate of 100%, Any accidents that we aren't anticipating may result in the failure of the ceremony, said the virtuous sage of heaven. Accidents? In my opinion, if there really are accidents, they'll come from these outsiders. However, how can I not take any precautions with regard to them? The great ceremony is something colossal that impacts the fate of our entire race, so I won't permit any accidents to happen at all, the Dark Star Emperor said resolutely, and his usually calm gaze became extremely cold. If the great ceremony succeeded, then he would be able to reach chaotic prime. If it failed, then he would have to remain at his current realm of cultivation, and he would not be able to break through for a very long time into the future. As a result, not only did the great ceremony impact the fate of the entire Dark Star race, but it was also connected to his personal interests. Hearing that, the virtuous sage of heaven could not help but smile eerily, except his entire body was blurry and hazy, like he was hidden in mist. No one could make out his true appearance, including the Dark Star Emperor. After pausing for a moment, the Dark Star Emperor said with a tone where he was basically asking for guidance. Virtuous sage of heaven, you said that once I reach the 9th heavenly layer of chaotic prime, I'll really be able to use the secret technique passed down throughout our race to wield the power left behind by our ancestor and the planetary beast to break free from the grand exalt of the wood spirit's restraints and free our race from this prison? There's a sliver of a chance, but even I don't know whether you'll succeed in the end or not. After all, this touches on the level of grand exalts. It involves far too many things that I don't understand, the virtuous sage of heaven said in deep thought, except a cold light flashed through his eyes that no one could make out, obscured in the mist. Even a sliver of a chance is fine. It's still better than no chance. Breaking free from the imprisonment of this world, and going outside to take a look at the real world has been the long-cherished wish of our race throughout all these years. The Dark Star Emperor sighed as his expression became sorrowful and dreary. Put positively, the Dark Star world was a miniature world that the Dark Star race possessed absolute power in, but put negatively, it was a prison. This prison had kept them trapped for countless years, forcing the many generations of their Dark Star race to forever live in this miniature world that could not be regarded as a true world left behind after the planetary beast had died. Breaking out of this prison and venturing to the true world outside had been the wish of every generation of the Dark Star race. Once the great ceremony succeeds, I'll use the fruit of nurturing ways to reach chaotic prime immediately. The 9th heavenly layer of chaotic prime won't be able to deter me. I will use the shortest time possible to reach the minimum cultivation required to comprehend the ancestors' secret technique. Afterwards, I'll wield the residual power left behind by our ancestors to break out of the grand exalts of the wood spirit's prison. It's just that in recent years, our race has developed grievances with quite a lot of organizations from the outside world. Once we break free, the organizations with grand primes won't spare us, and those items left behind by our ancestor will probably be coveted by the outside organizations too. Virtuous sage of heaven, you are a great sage of our race. You already existed even before I was born. May I ask if the organization you've established in the Saints' world after all these years of development is enough for our race to deal with the great problems we'll be facing once we break free? The Dark Star Emperor asked. You have nothing to worry about, Your Majesty. My organization has already reached a level where we don't even have to fear the 100 Saint City. As long as our race breaks free, even those outside organizations that operate among our Dark Star race won't be able to threaten us, said the virtuous sage of heaven. Then I don't have to worry. All right, may I ask if the virtuous sage of earth is well? The Dark Star Emperor asked. Thank you for your concern, Your Majesty. He's well, the virtuous sage of heaven said. Even though he spoke with a neutral tone, as if he was on equal footing with the Dark Star Emperor, he seemed more like a subject most of the time he communicated with the Dark Star Emperor. After a moment of thought, the Dark Star Emperor asked again, Virtuous sage of heaven, I've always been very curious about what your organization in the Saints' world is called. How many experts do you have? And what cultivation have you and the virtuous sage of earth reached so far such that you don't even fear the organizations behind the 100 Saint City? This has been something that has bothered me for many years now. Will the virtuous sage of heaven really refuse to divulge even a little? You should know our ancestors' instructions too, Your Majesty. All information regarding us in the Saints' world is the greatest secret within our race that cannot be divulged to anyone. Even you are no exception, Your Majesty. I have the right to protect this secret. This is just to prevent any accidents from happening. After all, our arch-nemesis, the wood spirits, are not extinct in the Saints' world. If the wood spirits find out our race has already secretly developed our own organization in the saints' world, you should be extremely familiar with the consequences, Your Majesty, the virtuous sage of heaven said calmly. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 2840. The Origins of the Virtuous Sages, the Wood Spirits. The Dark Star Emperor uttered those 3 words sternly. The words wood spirits seemed to possess some kind of magic, which made his emotions fluctuate and prevented him from remaining composed. Even his expression changed. It was something difficult to describe with words, but most of it was bone-deep hatred. That was because the wood spirits were the bitter enemies of their Dark Star race. In the battle countless years ago, the Dark Star race had been defeated. Not only did the Grand Exalt of the Dark Star race die at the hands of the wood spirits, but even their entire race had become trapped in this miniature world for generations upon generations, never to emerge for their entire lives. But even when their Dark Star race had declined to such a state, the power left behind by the Grand Exalt of the wood spirits still created a place like the 2 world mountains to suppress the Dark Star race. Without any exaggeration, an extremely long period of time had already passed since the battle back then, but the hatred between the wood spirits and the Dark Star race had not been reduced at all. Instead, this hatred gradually sank into the very being of every member of the Dark Star race as time went on. It was hundreds or even thousands of times more difficult for them to break through compared to the outsiders. Outsiders could directly cultivate to Grand Prime, while they could only reach Infinite Prime. The outsiders could roam freely in the vast sea of stars, visiting wherever they wanted to go, while they could only hole up in this miniature world. The root of all of this was connected to the wood spirits. This was a bitter feud, a hatred of an entire race that no one could pacify. Virtuous Sage of Heaven, how powerful are the wood spirits in the outside world? The Dark Star Emperor asked. He had once been apathetic to the situation of the wood spirits in the outside world because they were unable to leave this place, while the wood spirits clearly were not bold enough to enter. As a result, even with their bitter hatred, the 2 races were not fated to meet one day. The situation was different now. Their Dark Star race already possessed a sliver of hope to break out of this prison, so they could not help but re-evaluate the existence of the wood spirits. The wood spirits right now are nothing to be feared. It's just that the clan they're a part of has already produced a supreme figure who can claim invincibility below Grand Exalts in the saints' world of this day and age. And this person has already become our enemy. And they don't even know about the details of my background yet. If the matter of us secretly developing an organization in the saints' world is found out by the wood spirits, our forces in the saints' world will be in even greater danger if the wood spirits fan the flames on the side, said the virtuous sage of heaven. As soon as he mentioned the supreme figure, his tone became evidently sterner. Together with it was a deep feeling of fear. The Dark Star Emperor frowned. I never thought our race actually has such a great opponent in the outside world. Looks like even if we break out of here in the future, we need to carefully remain in hiding for a while. Your Majesty, there's still quite some time before we can break out of this prison. We can discuss the matters of the saints' world in the future. Right now, it's best if we gather the Hallmasters and Vice-Hallmasters and explain to them in detail the process and characteristics of the great ceremony. The virtuous sage of heaven changed the topic as if he was rather reluctant on expounding on the matters of the saints' world too much. The Dark Star Emperor nodded and said in thought, "Fair enough. The great ceremony this time is different from the past. We require the virtuous sage of heaven to reside over it in person. If that's the case, we obviously can't keep your identity a secret anymore. Though, it's about time we tell our upper echelon about the 2 virtuous sages of our race." Afterwards, the Dark Star Emperor immediately summoned the Hallmasters and Vice-Hallmasters of the 10 Divine Halls. This time, apart from the people of the 10 Divine Halls, even the 5 strongest city lords of the 36 major cities had arrived. The 5 city lords were also primordial realm experts, but they were all first heavenly layer infinite primes. The virtuous sage of heaven. Jian Chen noticed the virtuous sage of heaven as soon as he arrived in the Dark Star Divine Hall, as the virtuous sage of heaven's current location was far too conspicuous. He stood right beside the Dark Star Emperor. It would be difficult to not notice him. The virtuous sage of heaven's presence immediately made Jian Chen raise his vigilance. He became extremely careful as he watched himself with everything he had to avoid revealing any openings. That was because among the Dark Star race, the virtuous sage of heaven was the only one he could not read. Even though the illusionary body he currently presented did not possess particularly great strength, Jian Chen found the virtuous sage of heaven rather unfathomable. The hallmasters and vice-hallmasters of the 9 other divine halls clearly noticed the illusionary figure beside the Dark Star Emperor too. They were all taken aback and filled with doubt. Very clearly, all of the primordial realm experts present, apart from Jian Chen, did not even know the Dark Star race had a figure like the virtuous sage of heaven. The Dark Star Emperor glanced past everyone gradually. He first said, "Since everyone is present, then it's about time I announced a secret that only past emperors of the race had the right to know." The Dark Star Emperor's words made the gazes of all the primordial realm experts present stiffen. Many of them subconsciously glanced past the virtuous sage of heaven, who stood on the side as they sank into their thoughts. They all guessed that the secret that the Emperor mentioned was probably related to this illusionary figure. No one said anything. Everyone was waiting for the Dark Star Emperor to speak because as the upper echelon of the Dark Star race, they all knew that there were many absolute secrets that even Hallmasters had no right to learn about. Throughout the years, only the Dark Star Emperor of each generation could come into contact with this top-secret information. The Dark Star Emperor only said slowly after a small while of silence, "Countless years ago, our race once possessed some seniors and sages of great wisdom. In order for our race to break free one day, they came up with countless ideas and undertook countless experiments, paying a price well beyond our imagination before finally coming up with a method that could utilize the residual powers left behind by our ancestor, like holding the Great Ceremony. Soon after the discovery of the Great Ceremony, our seniors discovered that once they performed the ceremony and utilized the residual powers of the ancestor, it would momentarily clash with the powers of the Grand Exalt of the Wood Spirits. When this clash occurs, the seal the Grand Exalt of the Wood Spirits placed over our race will weaken for an instant. As a result, the seniors of our race chose the 2 most talented seniors in our race and imbued them with the great fortune of our race before utilizing our ancestors' residual power through the ceremony. While our ancestors' power clashed with the power from the Grand Exalt of the Wood Spirits, they finally managed to send out these 2 seniors who possessed the fortune of our race in hopes that they could find the way for our race to escape in the Saints' world. Ever since then, these 2 seniors became the virtuous sages of our race, as not only is the fortune of our race condensed on them, they also carry all of the hopes of our race breaking free on their shoulders, as well as the responsibility to watch over and protect our race one day in the future. These 2 virtuous sages were revered as the virtuous sage of heaven and the virtuous sage of earth by later descendants, as they are the future hope of our race, the hope to bring our race to a new world. And the one standing right beside me is one of the virtuous sages, the virtuous sage of heaven. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 2841. The Reason Within What? He's one of the 2 virtuous sages, the virtuous sage of heaven? I never thought there would actually be 2 virtuous sages, the virtuous sage of heaven and the virtuous sage of earth, in our race's history. Our seniors were brilliant. They actually already began seeking the hope for their future descendants to break free so long ago, in an age so distant that it cannot be traced back to. The revelation of the virtuous sage of heaven's identity immediately led to quite an uproar in the Dark Star Divine Hall. As the primordial realm experts gathered there were taken aback and stunned by the existence of the 2 virtuous sages. Some people also began looking at the virtuous sage of heaven with some doubt. Very clearly, they believed the existence of the 2 virtuous sages, but they did not find the virtuous sage of heaven before them particularly trustworthy. In other words, they did not accept him particularly well. Jian Chen had finally learnt the true origins of the virtuous sage of heaven in that moment too. The shock he experienced surpassed everyone else's emotions. Senior virtuous sage of heaven, there's something I'm puzzled by. Since you've been sent into the Saints' world since time immemorial, then you should have cultivated in the Saints' world for innumerable years too. With the abundant resources of the Saints' world, coupled with the great fortune of our entire race on you, you should have reached a supreme realm of cultivation that none of us dare to imagine. But why do I feel like the virtuous sage of heaven's current presence is nowhere near as powerful as I would imagine it to be? The 7th Hall Master Xueqi asked his question first. That's a good question, but I should break down this question into 2 parts to answer. The first part is with regard to an issue of time. The virtuous sage of heaven only smiled when he was faced with the Hall Master's obvious doubt and distrust. he explained calmly. Although a period of time so long that even I cannot describe has already passed since I was sent out of the Dark Star world, I haven't actually lived for that long. That's because while our clansmen did pay an extremely severe price to send me out in that distant age, my departure had not been a smooth journey. Instead, it was riddled with danger, where I could die from the slightest carelessness. After all, I had to breach the Grand Exalt of the Wood Spirit seal in order to leave. Even though the Grand Exalt of the Wood Spirit's power had been weakened by the residual power of our ancestor, it did not vanish completely. As a result, when the two of us left this world, the residual power of the Grand Exalt of the Wood Spirits tried to kill us. Even though we were blessed by our ancestor and we possessed the great fortune of our race on us, we still were not able to avoid the Grand Exalt of the Wood Spirit's powers completely. As a result, when the two of us reached the Spirit's world, we were already dead. Fortunately, right when our souls were about to be destroyed, a sliver of our spirit managed to escape, perhaps due to the protection of our ancestor. Afterwards, we immediately escaped being killed off by the powers of the Grand Exalt of the Wood Spirit through reincarnation. It's just that how can the powers of Grand Exalts be eroded away so easily? Even though the Grand Exalt of the Wood Spirits was already dead, his will still remained, and a few laws of the world he set down when he was still alive continued to exist. As a result, after reincarnating, the residual powers of the Grand Exalt of the Wood Spirits continued to entangle with us, making our days numbered with each rebirth and leading to early deaths every single time. Fortunately, we were under the indirect protection of our ancestors' powers, and we possessed the fortune of the entire Dark Star race, allowing us to be reborn again and again in the battle against the residual powers of the Grand Exalt of the Wood Spirits. In the end, even we reincarnated far more times than we could keep count of. But with every rebirth, we saw a brand new world. With every rebirth, the Saints' world was a different place. Who knew how long had passed? Finally, after countless rebirths, we finally reached our current life where we completely broke free from the cycle of torture from the Grand Exalt of the Wood Spirit's residual power, allowing us to properly cultivate. Reaching there, the virtuous sage of heaven paused momentarily. He continued with a lamenting voice filled with mixed emotions. As a result, although the two of us left the Dark Star world a very, very long time ago, we've spent a tremendous amount of time battling the residual powers of the Grand Exalt of the Wood Spirits, undergoing rebirth again and again. The actual time we've spent cultivating is nowhere near as long as you've all imagined. Everyone immediately fell into silent thought when they heard that. Rebirthing again and again, engaging in the most intense battle with the residual powers of the Grand Exalt again and again, dying again and again. What kind of torture was that? At the very least, the troubles they had been through, the torture they had endured, and the great sacrifices they had made was not something esteemed primordial realm experts like they who cultivated safely among the Dark Star race had ever experienced before. In that moment, many of their doubts and distrust had been diluted, replaced by sympathy and deep admiration. That was because they discovered compared to everything the virtuous sage of heaven had been through, they seemed to be living in heaven. Even though they were trapped here, unable to leave, they had no need to worry about any life-threatening danger. The virtuous sage of heaven continued. The second part is an issue with regard to my current state. Frankly, the seal that the Grand Exalt of the Wood Spirits placed on us doesn't just forbid our race from leaving. It also prevents our race from entering this place. As a result, since my main body possesses the bloodline of the Dark Star race, it cannot enter here. Otherwise, I'll definitely die. The figure you see right now is a soul clone that I only managed to cultivate after paying a certain price. And calling it a soul clone is actually not completely correct, as it possesses my soul, but it does not possess the bloodline or presence of the Dark Star race. That's not something I can explain with just a few words. In short, you can view this as my second soul, my second clone, or my second life. And the primary reason why my second soul is here is for the mission of conducting the great ceremony so that the great ceremony can proceed smoothly and succeed. I don't possess much battle prowess. Senior Virtuous Sage of Heaven, may I ask where the Virtuous Sage of Earth is? For the sake of our race, the two virtuous sages have made unimaginably great sacrifices. Your spirit of selfless sacrifice has filled me with admiration. I only want to properly pay my respects to the two virtuous sages right now, the 10th Hall Master Feng Shui said sincerely. The virtuous sage of Earth is in the Saints' world and is unable to enter here. For now, only I can visit the Dark Star race. The virtuous sage of heaven fell silent for a moment before saying, as for the other unimportant small matters, we can talk about them in the future. I've assembled you all here today primarily to hand over some details regarding the great ceremony. Afterwards, the virtuous sage of heaven reached the main topic. He explained the process of the great ceremony and the many issues and details that required attention to the many primordial realm experts. Everyone in the hall listened closely, afraid of missing even a single word. However, Jian Chen was rather distracted. That was because at that moment, he struggled to remain calm inside. Never did he think the original body of the virtuous sage of heaven would actually be in the saint's world, and he bore the great fortune of the dark star race on him. After all these years of cultivation, no one could imagine what level he had reached. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 2842. A Terrifying Theory. No wonder I always found the virtuous sage of heaven unfathomable and completely unreadable. So he's always been a supreme expert. Jian Chen's heart thumped violently. He recalled everything that had happened when he first met the virtuous sage of heaven, and could not help but suspect whether his identity had been seen through by the virtuous sage of heaven again. His mask was not truly foolproof. Those who reached the zenith of cultivation would all see through the mask and see his true appearance. What if the virtuous sage of heaven was an expert like that? After all, not only was the virtuous sage of heaven the most outstanding member of the Dark Star race back then, but the fortune of the entire Dark Star race was condensed on him too. He had undergone rebirth again and again under the protection of the residual powers of the Dark Star race's Grand Exalt. These inconceivable matters could converge on any regular person and they would undergo a fate-changing metamorphosis, let alone the virtuous sage of heaven. After all, he had been extraordinary in the first place. As a result, after a lengthy period of cultivation and possessing the experience from his many lives as the fortune of the Dark Star race, it would be no surprise that the virtuous sage of heaven could reach a level like that. For a moment, Jian Chen felt rather unsettled. Apart from the virtuous sage of heaven, the Dark Star race also has a virtuous sage of earth in the saint's world. The virtuous sage of earth's cultivation must be extremely terrifying too. Yet, I've infiltrated the Dark Star race this time under the request of the Myriad Bone Guild's heartless child. I've come to stop the Dark Star race's great ceremony. The heartless child has gone as far as to personally escort me to the ruins of the spirit's world just so that I can enter the Dark Star world and stop the great ceremony. I can tell that obstructing the great ceremony is extremely important to the heartless child. But why doesn't the heartless child want the Dark Star race's great ceremony to succeed? What's he worrying about? With his cultivation at the very apex, even if the Dark Star race does break free, destroying the entire race will only take a flick of his hand. At this moment, Jian Chen thought of a few problems he had never considered. The more he thought, the more doubtful and confused he became. Or perhaps, the heartless child is the virtuous sage of earth among the Dark Star race? Suddenly, Jian Chen thought of a ridiculous theory. However, as soon as he thought of that, a few doubts he could not explain were immediately resolved in the process. The virtuous sage of heaven and the virtuous sage of earth were originally together. If the heartless child is the virtuous sage of earth, then he should share the same origins as the virtuous sage of heaven standing before me. If that's the case, the virtuous sage of heaven will obviously know too that the heartless child has sent me to stop the Dark Star race's great ceremony. The virtuous sage of heaven clearly knows I'm working against the Dark Star race, yet he just refuses to stop me, feigning ignorance instead. All of this points to the conclusion that stopping the Dark Star race's great ceremony is not just the will of the heartless child, but also the will of the virtuous sage of heaven. If it really is like what I theorize, then it perfectly explains why the virtuous sage of heaven remained silent despite finding out about my identity. That's because the virtuous sage of heaven doesn't want the great ceremony of the Dark Star race to succeed either. Jian Chen thought rapidly as more and more terrifying ideas appeared in his head. Even he himself found these ideas to be absurd and highly unlikely, but after connecting these points, he discovered many things now made perfect sense. He felt like he had peeled away the mist and realized the truth. Why does the heartless child want to stop the great ceremony of the Dark Star race? And why doesn't the virtuous sage of heaven hope the great ceremony succeeds either? Weren't they members of the Dark Star race? And with the terrifying cultivations of the two virtuous sages, let alone reaching chaotic prime, even if the Dark Star Emperor reaches Grand Prime, he will probably still be as puny as an ant before the heartless child and the virtuous sage of heaven. He's presiding over the great ceremony this time. If he doesn't wish for the ceremony to succeed, he's had far too many opportunities to stop it. Why does he need an outsider like me to carry this out? Many questions appeared in Jian Chen's mind. After realizing the virtuous sage of heaven's identity and intentions, it also brought him even more doubts and questions. Suddenly, he remembered how the virtuous sage of heaven behaved like a subject in front of the Dark Star Emperor the other day. A realization flashed through his head, and he suddenly saw the light. Don't tell me the virtuous sages of heaven and earth were also bound by some kind of oath when they were sent out back then? Such that they can't do anything detrimental to the Dark Star race? Which is why they're forced to go to such great lengths and have others complete certain tasks for them. And their final objective is not to actually destroy the entire Dark Star race, but just like what the Heartless Child said, just to stop the great ceremony so that chaotic primes cannot appear within the Dark Star race. The stronger the Dark Star race becomes, the greater the chance they have of breaking free. Once the Dark Star race actually manages to break out of here, the virtuous sages of heaven and earth who possess unrivaled power and influence in the saints' world will be reduced to mere subjects. If that's the case, then all of the questions and mysteries can be explained. As the analysis became clearer and clearer, Jian Chen instead calmed down. However, this calmness did not last for too long. He soon remembered something else, and an undetectable gleam of cold light flashed through his eyes immediately. I've already said everything I needed to say. Please commit this to heart. We cannot allow anything to go wrong in the great ceremony this time. The virtuous sage of heaven spoke for half a day, and only then did he finish up with the entire process and all the details, as well as some matters that required special attention regarding the great ceremony. You have nothing to worry about, virtuous sage of heaven. The great ceremony impacts the fate of our entire race. If any of us makes any mistake, we'll obviously be offenders of the entire race. The second Hallmaster Arna clasped his hand with undisguisable respect as he said to the virtuous sage of heaven. Please do not worry, virtuous sage of heaven. We will do everything we can to. After Arna, the many Hallhamsters and Vice Hallmasters all spoke up too and basically swore oaths. After dispersing, Jian Chen returned to the fifth divine hall. He sat back on the fifth Hallmaster's throne and sank into his thoughts. He had already grasped the detailed process and undertaking of the great ceremony. Now, he was contemplating when he should strike. Merging with the blood of the myriad and being tempered with ancient secret techniques. The great ceremony is clearly a fortuitous encounter for Sacred Feather, but the slightest carelessness can doom him for good, Jian Chen sighed inside. Then he vanished from the throne with a flash, arriving in the secret room he used for secluded cultivation. Behind the shut doors, Jian Chen activated all the isolating formations of the secret room before casting down a few formations himself. He behaved secretively, very cautious and careful. Only after completing everything did he sit down on the ground, taking out Kuan Tian's god-tier sword. He pointed the sharp tip of the sword at his abdomen before plunging it in viciously. Under his full strength, the powerful chaotic body was pierced with difficulty. A smear of red immediately appeared on his abdomen. The sharp tip had already stabbed into his body, leaving behind a 2-inch-long wound. Afterwards, Jian Chen stuck a finger into the wound and pulled out a jade bottle he had sealed inside his own flesh. The jade bottle was not big, only the size of a little finger. However, that was not the case inside. It hid quite a large space. Back then, I specially kept some of Kuan Tian's blood just in case. Now, I finally have a use for it. Jian Chen murmured as he gazed at the tiny bottle in his hand. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 2843. Probing. Afterwards, Jian Chen cut open his finger and sealed Kuan Tian's blood from the bottle in his finger. When he sealed the blood, he could not help but think about the mysterious virtuous sage of heaven again. If the virtuous sage of heaven really is a supreme expert who can see through my mask, then I won't be able to hide anything I've done in the fifth divine hall from him. If his objective really is in line with the Heartless Child's, then even if he knows my identity, he'll take the initiative and cover me. As a result, I probably don't need to intentionally watch myself anymore before the virtuous sage of heaven, Jian Chen thought, but he still did not find it sufficiently ensuring. What if he was wrong? Looks like I need to find some time and probe out the virtuous sage of heaven. At the very least, I need to confirm which side he's standing on. That way, I can adjust accordingly for the great ceremony. The next day, Jian Chen visited the Dark Star Divine Hall alone, wishing to see the Dark Star Emperor. In the same majestic hall, the Dark Star Emperor sat on his throne with his legs crossed serenely, as composed as a mountain. As for Jian Chen, he bent his back slightly, maintaining a bow as he stood below. Kuan Tian, why have you come to find me? The Dark Star Emperor asked. His voice was extremely flat. Your Majesty, I still have some aspects I'm not completely sure about regarding the great ceremony, so I wish to see the virtuous sage. I hope the virtuous sage can alleviate me of my doubts, Jian Chen said from below. The Dark Star Emperor considered his request silently before saying, Is the virtuous sage of heaven present? The virtuous sage of heaven did not answer his first call. Afterwards, the Dark Star Emperor called a second and a third time. After 3 calls, the virtuous sage of heaven still did not appear. The Dark Star Emperor immediately became somewhat helpless as a result. The virtuous sage of heaven has always been elusive. Even I can't locate him. It's best if you come another day. Yes, Your Majesty. Jian Chen showed a sliver of pity. He left the Dark Star Divine Hall after bidding farewell, returning to the 5th Divine Hall. Kuan Tian, what is your reason for looking for me? However, soon after Jian Chen returned to the 5th Divine Hall, a familiar voice rang out in the empty hall. He raised his head suddenly and immediately spotted the virtuous sage of heaven's illusionary figure. He currently hovered in the air, giving off no presence at all. Even when sweeping him with the senses of the soul, there was nothing. It was impossible to detect his existence without the naked eye. Jian Chen's eyes flashed. He immediately stood up and bowed towards the virtuous sage of heaven. Greetings to Senior. He paused for a moment before continuing. I do indeed have some things I'd like to ask Senior. There are some matters regarding the great ceremony that I'm still unsure of, that I haven't understood completely yet. Afterwards, Jian Chen played along and asked a few detailed questions regarding the great ceremony, as well as many questions that confounded him. The virtuous sage of heaven did not seem to be suspicious of him. He answered all of Jian Chen's questions seriously as if he truly was working towards the success of the great ceremony. Jian Chen could not help but develop suspicion over the virtuous sage of heaven's seriousness. He wondered whether his theory about the virtuous sage of heaven's identity was correct or not. The virtuous sage of heaven was not on the same side as the heartless child? Thank you for answering my questions so patiently, Senior. It's just that the great ceremony this time is far too important to our race. And not only have I lost my past memories, but I'm even under the influence of the memories of the planetary beast. Once I lose control, even I don't know what I can end up doing, so I feel slightly pressured inside. I'm afraid of affecting the great ceremony. Jian Chen was deeply worried. He suddenly asked, Virtuous Sage of Heaven, do you think the ceremony this time will fail? What if it fails? Fail. The virtuous Sage of Heaven repeated that word quietly and sank into his thoughts. Only a long while later did he say slowly, If it fails, then all the preparations we've made and prices we've paid for the ceremony over all these years will go to waste, and our grand wish of being able to reach chaotic prime will fall through too. Even that divine beast, sigh. What will happen to the divine beast? Jian Chen's heart skipped a beat, but he asked without showing any of it. The virtuous Sage of Heaven pondered silently for a moment before answering, If the great ceremony succeeds, then the divine beast will become the medium for us to wield our grand exalt's residual powers. Its flesh, blood, and vitality will all vanish from the world. Perhaps you can say it will merge with this world of ours, becoming a sacrifice of the ceremony. But if the ceremony fails, not only is there the chance for the divine beast to survive, but it might even experience a great fortuitous encounter that will lead to a drastic increase in strength after merging with the blood of the myriad. Our race has done so many horrific and brutal things to that divine beast. The divine beast definitely hates our race to the bone, so if the ceremony fails and the divine beast's strength surges, it will become a potentially great problem for our race. Jian Chen frowned, and a sliver of cold light flashed through his eyes. He said coldly, In other words, even if the ceremony fails, we need to kill the divine beast before it can grow, just so we can eliminate any potential future problems. As long as you understand. However, there's no need for you to fret over this. The emperor has thought through all the positive and negative consequences a long time ago. If that happens, he'll personally eliminate this source of trouble. The virtuous sage of heaven's figure gradually vanished. At the same time, his voice that seemed to be layered with other meaning in Jian Chen's eyes drifted through his ear. Kuan Tian, since you're the fifth hall master, you obviously have your own tasks to accomplish. The success or failure of the ceremony is not for you to worry about. You only need to focus on carrying out your tasks. With that, the virtuous sage of heaven vanished completely, while Jian Chen returned to the hallmaster's throne and sat back down, sinking into a long period of silent thought. If the ceremony succeeds, then Sacred Feather's death is certain. If the ceremony fails, not only will Sacred Feather survive, but he'll even experience a great fortuitous encounter. With how straightforward the virtuous sage of heaven has been to me regarding Sacred Feather's fate, it instead seems like he's dropping me a hint, or should I say, a warning. He's warning me that if I want Sacred Feather to survive, I have to stop the great ceremony, or Sacred Feather will die. And what he said at the end. The success or failure of the ceremony is not for me to worry about. I only need to focus on carrying out my tasks. The success or failure of the great ceremony is something that all members of the Dark Star race should worry about. After all, it's something major that can change their fate, yet the virtuous sage of heaven said it's something I don't need to worry about? As for my tasks, my objectives for infiltrating the Dark Star race is firstly to save Sacred Feather, and secondly, to complete the Heartless Child's mission, stop the ceremony. Why do I feel like the virtuous sage of heaven was not directing what he said towards the Kuan Tian of the past? Instead, it seems more like he's implying something to my true identity, Jian Chen. Jian Chen sat on the throne as his eyes flickered with uncertainty. Looks like my theory is likely to be correct. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 2844. The great ceremony begins afterwards. It became much more peaceful among the Dark Star race. The reason why it was described as peaceful was because the cultivators that could be seen almost everywhere outside the cities had decreased in number, while the outsiders who entered and left the Two World Mountains had vanished completely. There were only patrol squads assembled from Dark Star race god kings that roamed the lands of the Dark Star world, capturing any outsiders who wandered about outside. The 100 Saint City had always been in a state of full vigilance, and the protective formations remained in their strongest state. As the 52 organizations that stayed behind in the city secretly hoped the great ceremony of the Dark Star race would end sooner, they also carefully prepared themselves by guarding the only teleportation formation in the 100 Saint City. That was their hope of escaping, the last thing they could count on. They carried out extremely strict inspections on the teleportation formation. They would basically look through it once, inside and out, every single day, even sending people through it as experiments to ensure it could operate normally when they needed it to. Although some of these prodigies had already begun considering retreating due to being afraid of death, their trip to the Dark Star world this time was more of a test from their clan. It affected their futures, which was why none of them wanted to be deserters before they had confirmed if there were any dangers or not. Even though a third of the organizations in the 100 Saint City had already left earlier, that was because of the 7th Divine Hall's threats. If they did not retreat, all that would be awaiting them was death. Shrinking back under those circumstances was not embarrassing, and their clans would not blame them either. However, if they retreated purely because of the tense atmosphere among the Dark Star race, escaping when they were under the protection of the 5th Hall Master, that was something intrinsically different. As a result, the 52 organizations of the 100 Saint City stood fast to their positions. Time passed by silently. Under the great anticipation of the entire Dark Star race and the nervous and highly uneasy waiting of the outsiders, the day of the great ceremony that the Dark Star race had been preparing for all this time finally arrived. The location of the great ceremony was the capital city of the Dark Star race. All the peak experts of the Dark Star race had already assembled there. Apart from all the primordial realm experts of the Dark Star race, the city lords of the 36 major cities, the 108 kings and the 36 lords of each major city had all assembled there too. All outsiders had vanished from the capital city a long time ago. All of the people from the Saints' world and the ruins of the Spirits' world had been gathered in the 36 major cities. The great ceremony this time was a colossal matter that could change the entire Dark Star race's fate, so the Dark Star race truly placed great emphasis on the issue of safety during the ceremony. Not only were all 10 renowned armies of the Dark Star race stationed inside and outside the city, but even the 36 cities had assembled all of their forces to stand guard under the lead of the various vice city lords. The people they were guarding against were all the outsiders placed under house arrest in the 36 major cities. Above the capital city, the 10 divine halls that originally hovered there had all been moved to certain positions. They seemed to stand in a certain formation, and the Dark Star Divine Hall that originally hovered above the 10 divine halls had descended, surrounded by the 10 divine halls in a special array. It was like the moon surrounded by many stars. The 11 divine halls hovered in the air. Each divine hall gave off dazzling light and emitted powerful pulses of energy. At first glance, they were like 11 luminous suns. Below the divine halls were the forces from the 36 major cities. Under the lead of each city lord with the 36 lords and 108 kings providing support, they sat in the air in huge formations. Among them, the Dark Knight City also had a newly chosen city lord, as well as a new generation of the 36 lords and 108 kings. Below the forces of the 36 cities were the countless citizens of the capital city. Currently, all of them knelt on the ground with faces filled with devotion, quietly waiting for the stirring moment. Open the sacrificial altar. At this moment, the Dark Star Emperor sat on top of the Dark Star Divine Hall in the air. His expression was solemn as he spoke in a dignified voice. His voice spread across the entire city, landing in everyone's ears. Opening the sacrificial altar, drawing the power of the Windless City. Opening the sacrificial altar, drawing the power of the Dark Hell City. Opening the sacrificial altar, drawing the power of the Dewy City. Opening the sacrificial altar, drawing the power of the Dark Night City. Opening the sacrificial altar, drawing the power of the Black Light City. Virtually the moment the Dark Star Emperor finished talking, the voices of the 36 city lords boomed through the air. With their voices, the formations assembled from the 36 lords and the 108 kings were activated. In that moment, they seemed to establish some kind of mysterious connection with the 36 major cities nowhere close to them. Immediately, 36 pillars of resplendent light shot into the air in the distance, rushing towards the capital city from 36 different places. This was the power of the 36 major cities. The 36 clusters of energy traversed the great distance and directly enveloped their city lord, 36 lords, and 108 kings. Afterwards, under the control of the 36 city lords, the 36 clusters of energy merged together in a single moment, radiating with enough light to dazzle the entire world and directly plunging 10,000 meters into the air above the city like a sword. From afar, it seemed like a huge pillar of white light had risen up from the ground and pierced the heavens. It was like a pillar that upheld the sky, resplendent and glorious. In the next moment, the space at an altitude of 10,000 meters pulsed violently. The pillar of energy condensed from the powers of the 36 cities seemed to be a key, opening a mysterious gate hidden within the void. Within the mysterious gate, an altar that seemed to be forged completely out of white jade hovered up. The altar was not particularly large. It was a few thousand meters across at most and was littered with stone tablets. Ancient diagrams and characters were engraved on the altar as if it recorded the lustrous and glorious history of the Dark Star race. It radiated with a heavy presence of age. In the very center of the altar stood a humanoid stone statue. It was extremely large, surrounded by thousands of stone tablets. It was worshipped by countless lives, like a sovereign of the past. However, the stone statue was faceless. It was impossible to make out its facial features or appearance. It was only possible to tell from the characteristics of its body that it was a man. An abnormally lofty man who gave off an aura of utter dominance and supremacy. Is this the grand exalt of the Dark Star race? Seated in the air above the fifth divine hall, Jian Chen shuddered inside because he could sense an indescribably profound aura of ways from the faceless statue. In his eyes, the statue seemed to have condensed the ways of the Dark Star race, the apex of all ways within the Dark Star race. The altar gradually drifted out of the space in the void before hovering 10,000 meters above the capital city. When the space there settled back down, the illusionary figure of the virtuous sage of heaven suddenly appeared. He did not fly over to the altar immediately, instead climbing up a set of invisible stairs, making his way over to the altar step by step. Standing on the altar, the virtuous sage of heaven's illusionary figure slowly knelt down. He knelt on both his knees and buried his head deeply into the icy cold floor before speaking out in a booming voice. Bow to the ancestor. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: You can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 2845. Elevation of the Essence Blood, 1. With that, from the Dark Star Emperor and 10 Hall Masters up above to the common citizens of the Dark Star race, everyone bowed. This bow was directed towards the ancestor of their Dark Star race. It was directed to the most powerful person in the history of their Dark Star race. It was directed to the supreme sovereign of the past. Before the stone statue of the sovereign, even someone like the virtuous sage of heaven had to cast aside all of his pride, also dropping down on 2 knees, his face filled with devotion. This was all because the figure the stone statue depicted had been a supreme grand exalt that had basically become an embodiment of the heavenly ways, able to set down laws of the world and even influence the operation of the heavenly ways to a certain degree. A figure like that was the greatest force and the sturdiest cornerstone of a complete major world, worshipped by millions. They could not be infringed upon or blasphemed. Jian Chen also knelt down in that moment. Even though he was rather reluctant inside, he was forced to kneel, or he would stick out. However, upon remembering how this figure had been a supreme grand exalt in the past, he no longer found it so difficult to accept. First bow. Second bow. Third bow. 9th bow. Only after a total of 9 bows did the illusionary virtuous sage of heaven stand up. Afterwards, under his lead, they performed several other sacred and solemn rites. Only 4 hours later did these tedious rites come to an end. With the power of the 36 cities as the supplementary force and the power of the 10 divine halls as the primary force, activate the sacrificial altar. The virtuous sage of heaven's voice rang out again. Immediately, the power of the 36 major cities was activated again. Every single city became an enormous energy reserve in that moment. Not only did the entire city glow, but every single city was hiding a cluster of boundless energy deep underground. The energy had all been accumulated over countless years as the formations of the cities absorbed the energy of the world such that the energy stored below each city had reached an extremely startling level. Now, these tremendous amounts of energy that had been set aside for all these years was summoned through the formations assembled out of the 36 city lords and their respective 36 lords and 108 kings. It crossed through the tremendous space and reached the capital city of the Dark Star race. This time, they were performing the rite to activate the sacrificial altar. Just the power of the 36 cities was clearly nowhere near enough to activate the altar, so they also required the participation of the 10 divine halls. The 10 divine halls had assembled a special formation in the air a long time ago. The power of the divine halls weaved together, conjuring some kind of profound law before being sent into the sacrificial altar high in the air with the power of the 36 cities. As a result, the sacrificial altar lit up with blinding light in that moment as if it had awakened from a slumbering state. The entire altar seemed to come alive, giving off a bleak presence. Jian Chen's eyes narrowed as he stared straight into the air. Sacrifice the divine beast. The virtuous sage of heaven's voice rang out. The eyes of the Dark Star Emperor who sat atop the Dark Star Divine Hall lit up. They were filled with undisguisable excitement and anticipation. He immediately waved his hand and something drifted out of the divine hall hidden in his sleeve, landing directly on the sacrificial altar. Jian Chen's emotions also began to heave violently with its appearance. His feelings surged and even his body gave off a visible tremble. Even his presence became rather disorderly. That was because the thing that had flown out from the divine hall hidden in the Dark Star Emperor's sleeve was Sacred Feather, the winged tiger god of the Tian Yuan continent, the Sacred Feather Tiger Emperor. Sacred Feather seemed to be in an extremely miserable state. He appeared before everyone in his beast form, but he had ceased to possess the same valiance of the past a long time ago. He was currently matted with dried blood, and his vital energies were on the brink of running out. He was only skin and bones. He basically resembled a dried corpse. Sacred Feather was already on the verge of death. Each breath he took could easily be his last. If the Dark Star Emperor had not kept his life intact the entire time through heavenly resources, he probably would not have been able to last until now after going through so much inhumane torture. Sacred Feather. Jian Chen murmured inside and slowly closed his eyes. Who knew whether it was because he could not bear to see Sacred Feather's current state, or because he wanted to hide the surging killing intent that had already reached a level that he struggled to keep concealed in his eyes. Dark Star Race, I will definitely make you pay a heavy price. Jian Chen's heart tossed and turned like the raging ocean as he secretly swore an oath from the bottom of his heart. Back on the Tian-Yuan continent, they were already together soon after Sacred Feather had been born, before he had even opened his eyes. Afterwards, just like that, a man and a tiger set off on a small bumpy path with firm strides, growing up and growing stronger together. Along the way, they had gone through countless setbacks and experienced countless intense battles. They had gone through thick and thin together. The feelings that existed between him and Sacred Feather could not be understood by regular people. The divine beast's blood. The virtuous sage of heaven's voice rang out from the altar. The Dark Star Emperor waved his hand again, and over 100 droplets of essence blood flew out. All of the essence blood had come from Sacred Feather. It was equivalent to all of the essence blood his body possessed. However, the essence blood had ceased to possess Sacred Feather's presence a long time ago. All of the essence blood had been modified such that they possessed the presence of the Dark Star race. Draw out the blood of the myriad. The virtuous sage of heaven's voice gradually increased in pitch. With that, the Dark Star Emperor cut open his own finger first, and immediately, a droplet of essence blood that belonged to him flew out. Every single droplet of essence blood was directly connected to the source of a cultivator's life. It was a condensation of their vital energies, and it was of utmost importance to them. Having lost the droplet of essence blood, the Dark Star Emperor's complexion became visibly paler. Below, the 10 Hallmasters, Vice Hallmasters, and even the clansmen kneeling on the ground, regardless of their strength, all offered up a droplet of their essence blood as long as they partook in the ceremony. Jian Chen was no exception either, but the essence blood he offered up was not his own. Instead, it was the blood he had gathered from Kuan Tian after killing him. As a result, his essence blood gave off a pure presence of the Dark Star race. It did not give him away at all. All of the essence blood slowly drifted into the air under an invisible force, merging with the converted essence blood from Sacred Feather. In the end, the cluster of essence blood reached an extremely large size, becoming a huge cluster of blood over 3 meters across. The virtuous sage of heaven stood on the altar as he formed seals with his hands, drawing out the invisible power of the altar and transforming it into an eerie white flame that engulfed the essence blood before blazing brightly. In the end, the huge cluster of essence blood from the myriad clansmen of the Dark Star race became smaller and smaller under the flames. However, as it shrank, the essence inside clearly became highly concentrated such that the level of the essence blood increased at a visible rate. Sacred Feather's essence blood had been at a very high level of quality in the first place, but through this elevation today, the quality of essence blood immediately became much greater than Sacred Feather's original essence blood. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 2846. Elevation of the Essence Blood, 2. Jian Chen stared straight at the sky, gazing at the cluster of essence blood undergoing refinement. He felt lacking in confidence. He was familiar with the process of the great ceremony. The Dark Star race would merge the blood of the myriad with the White Tiger's essence blood first, increasing its quality for the final objective of elevating the power of Sacred Feather's bloodline to a level as close as possible to the bloodline of a Grand Exalt. Of course, by as close as possible, it was only equivalent to the first generation of descendants of a Grand Exalt. It would not truly reach the level of a Grand Exalt's bloodline. The Dark Star race wanted to elevate Sacred Feather's bloodline to the level that belonged to a first-generation descendant of the Grand Exalt of the Dark Star race. Even though it would not be from a true descendant, nor would it truly possess the bloodline of the Grand Exalt, it could resonate with the lingering powers of the Grand Exalt of the Dark Star race to a certain degree. The degree of resonance and the level of compatibility would be well beyond what any member of the Dark Star race could achieve. Even the Dark Star Emperor could not achieve something like that. As a result, not only would Sacred Feather's chances at activating the Grand Exalt's remaining powers increase, but the amount of power he could activate would become greater too. Can the level of a bloodline really be elevated this easily? Jian Chen asked himself. He was also a primordial realm expert, and he was quite knowledgeable after spending so many years in the Saints' world. He had never seen or heard of a method similar to how the Dark Star race used so much mixed essence blood to strengthen Sacred Feather's bloodline. As a result, when he saw the quality of the cluster of essence blood elevate under the scorching of the Dark Star race's secret technique, he became worried. He was worried about whether this would lead to any side effects for Sacred Feather. Otherwise, if the level of bloodlines could be elevated so easily, Impressive bloodlines would be everywhere in the saints' world that was littered with experts. Although the virtuous sage of heaven has told us the process of the great ceremony in detail, I still feel like I'm lacking some critical information. I should wait a little longer, thought Jian Chen. He forcefully held back his urge to take action as he observed the developments of the great ceremony closely. The Dark Star race was a race that had produced a grand exalt in the past after all. Perhaps they possessed some wondrous techniques that even a few peak clans renowned throughout the saints' world were not in possession of. 2 hours later, the huge cluster of essence blood, over 3 meters across, had finally shrunken to the size of a fist under the refinement of the formation, while the quantity of essence blood went from several hundreds of thousand droplets, or even over 1,000,000 droplets, to less than 200 droplets. This quantity was roughly equivalent to how much essence blood they had drawn from Sacred Feather. The only difference was the cluster of essence blood had clearly exceeded Sacred Feather's essence blood in terms of quality. But to Jian Chen, even though the quality of the essence blood had increased drastically, it was still worlds apart from the level of a Grand Exalt's bloodline. Afterwards, under the virtuous sage of heaven's control, the fist-sized cluster of essence blood turned into a trickling stream and flowed to Sacred Feather's heart, slowly channeling into his body. Immediately, Sacred Feather's body that was as shriveled as withered would seem to receive tremendous amounts of nourishment. It began to swell bit by bit as his withered flesh and blood recovered at a visible rate. Sacred Feather slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were dim and lifeless, filled with a sensation of weakness. He could obviously sense his body recovering, but the recovery did not bring any signs of his condition taking a turn for the better. Instead, pain appeared in his eyes. He felt like he was undergoing a painful torture that a divine beast that had reached God King like him struggled to endure. Crack! Suddenly, there was a crisp sound, and Sacred Feather's flesh that had just recovered suddenly ruptured. It also seemed like he had become a piece of pottery, and that pottery had cracked. With the constant cracks, more and more parts of his body ruptured. The cracks constantly expanded, covering his entire body very soon. It really seemed like his entire body had shattered. This was the result of incompatible essence blood. Because Sacred Feather's essence blood had already been converted, now contaminated with the presence of the Dark Star race, the essence blood no longer belonged to him from a certain perspective. Forcefully merging it with him would obviously lead to problems. At the same time, the strength of the essence blood had completely exceeded the limits of what he could withstand. These two issues appeared at the same time, leading to this. However, the virtuous sage of heaven who stood on the sacrificial altar was unfazed as if he had been expecting this. He formed a seal with his fingers and curled it towards him. In the next moment, colossal formations slowly appeared on the ground of the 36 major cities as if they were linked to the entire city. Supported by the tremendous energy reserves accumulated over all these years, the entire formation was suddenly activated. Ah! WWH. What's happening? My vitality, the powers of my soul, and my vital energies are all being drawn away rapidly. Oh no, my cultivation is leaking away. It's the formation below us. Damn it, the Dark Star race really was harboring no good intentions by trapping us here. They're draining our lives through the formation. As soon as the formations were activated, whales immediately filled the 36 major cities. The whales were filled with raging fury and hatred, as the outsiders trapped in the cities were all being robbed mercilessly of the power of their cultivations, the power of their souls, their vitality, and even the tremendous life force in their bodies. It gathered together from various locations in the city before being transported to the distant capital city through the formation. It was not only the 36 major cities. The 100 Saint City fell victim to the same situation. Even though no formations appeared on the ground inside the 100 Saint City, the same formation as the 36 major cities appeared in the sky outside the barrier, operating automatically by absorbing the energy of the world. It also devoured the power of cultivations, the power of souls, and the vitality and tremendous life force of all cultivators in the 100 Saint City. The Dark Star race are a group of bastards. They had actually cast down such a vicious formation in secret a long time ago. They're trying to sacrifice us. Let's go. Let's go quickly. We need to get out of here. Go to the teleportation formation and pull out of the 100 Saint City immediately. The faces of the prodigies all changed drastically in the 100 Saint City. They all rushed towards the teleportation formation frantically and fearfully like they were fleeing for their lives. However, at this very moment, there was a great rumble, and the teleportation formation established in the 100 Saint city that served as their only path of escape suddenly exploded. The entire teleportation formation was blasted to pieces. Oh, no. Immediately, prodigies cried out miserably. Their faces immediately paled, filled with despair. This was because all of the power in their bodies was rapidly flowing away as they stood in the devouring formation, making them become weaker and weaker. If this continued, they would not be able to last very long before they died from running out of life force. Countless cultivators roared and shrieked out in despair in the 36 major cities. They wanted to resist, but they discovered that as the formation operated beneath their feet, as their power and life force rapidly leaked away, they became weaker and weaker. Let alone resist, they could not even hover in the air anymore. The devouring force was far too great, much more powerful than what life-devouring beasts could achieve. And it did not simply devour their life force, but the power of their cultivations, souls and so on. Dark Star Race, how diabolical of you. You actually want to sacrifice so many of us. Dark Star Race, even if I become a ghost, I won't spare you. There will be retribution for your diabolical actions. Our sects in the Saints' world will never spare you. Within the capital city of the Dark Star Race, a total of 37 flows of energy containing a mix of the power of cultivations, souls, and lives enveloped Sacred Feather as bands of colorful light. As the different powers were drained from the outsiders and channeled into Sacred Feather, he immediately underwent a transformation inside and out, with all aspects being elevated. When the formations in the cities absorbed the various powers, they also refined it, and because the outsiders were not too powerful, the refinement was completed in an extremely short amount of time, turning it into an extremely pure and masterless energy with all impurities removed. The various pure masterless powers were obviously very easy to absorb. As a result, when the bands of light enveloped Sacred Feather, his soul, cultivation, vital energy, and even his life force recovered at an extremely terrifying rate. The disadvantage that came from being overly frail and unable to endure the essence blood was eliminated very quickly, as the tremendous life force from thousands of cultivators rapidly healed his wounds. It had completely caught up to the rate at which the essence blood wreaked havoc. And, the power from the vital energy of countless cultivators rapidly strengthened Sacred Feather's body. The power of souls from countless cultivators also rapidly strengthened Sacred Feather's soul. In short, the Sacred Feather right now basically seemed like he had consumed some ultimate, nourishing medicine. From inside to out, every single aspect of him was growing and being elevated. This elevation of all aspects could be described as a form of evolution. That was because he was also merging with the essence blood the Dark Star Race had refined with their secret technique. The speed at which it merged was not particularly fast, and the essence blood contaminated with the Dark Star Race's presence was not particularly compatible with Sacred Feather's body, resulting in signs of rejection, but the power of Sacred Feather's bloodline still grew in quality by a visible amount. Jian Chen sat atop the fifth divine hall and paid close attention to Sacred Feather's condition. He had already poised himself for battle in secret a long time ago, ready to take action at any time. Everything unfolding on Sacred Feather right now had already exceeded his understanding to a certain degree, as it involved far too much uncertainty, as well as many absurd methods he had never even heard of in the Saints' world. With the world as the furnace and the great ways as the flame, the myriad blood merges as one. At this moment, the virtuous sage of heaven called out, and a huge illusionary furnace appeared out of nowhere, wrapping around Sacred Feather. Afterwards, the ways and laws appeared, turning into an invisible flame and carrying out a second refinement of Sacred Feather. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 2847. Grand exalts essence blood. The refinement was not only directed at Sacred Feather's body, but also his soul and bloodline. The process clearly brought Sacred Feather unimaginable pain. He put up a violent struggle in the spatial furnace as he let out soundless roars. The flesh and blood he had just recovered gradually vanished through the refinement. At the same time, the presence of ways that belonged to the Dark Star Race merged with his flesh and blood strand by strand through the refinement of the spatial furnace. With each strand, the power of the Dark Star Race that Sacred Feather gave off would increase and grow stronger. At the same time, the tremendous life force drained from the outsiders constantly flowed into Sacred Feather. In the end, as his flesh vanished under the refinement of the furnace, New flesh and blood regrew rapidly. The new flesh and blood had become evidently more powerful after merging with the stronger essence blood and all the powers from the outsiders. The only issue with all of this was while the flesh still belonged to Sacred Feather, it became closer and closer to the flesh of the Dark Star race no matter how Jianchen looked at it. The refinement lasted for a total of 4 hours before ending. Even though it was very short, every part of Sacred Feather, both inside and out, soared qualitatively. His strength increased tremendously. Let alone everything else, his body alone had reached the primordial realm after receiving inhumane, torturous refinement. With how tough his body was now, it was already enough to endure the strengthened essence blood. However, the formations in the 36 major cities and the 100 Saint City did not stop. Their devouring force did not weaken at all, growing in strength instead. Energy and vitality was drained from the outsiders, all gathering above the capital city. In the end, the various powers gathered above the capital city became more and more tremendous. The spatial furnace stopped refining. The entire ceremony seemed to fall into a momentary silence. Only the virtuous sage of heaven stood sturdily on the altar. He was in no hurry to progress with the next step as if he was waiting for something. Jianchen's heart sat in his throat. He could obviously sense Sacred Feather's strengthened bloodline, but to him, it was still nowhere close to the level that a first-generation descendant of a Grand Exalt possessed. Even though he had never met any first-generation descendants of Grand Exalts, it was not difficult to imagine. He could already tell that Sacred Feather's strengthened bloodline had mostly been elevated in terms of quantity. There was an increase in terms of quality too, but the increase was not as great as he imagined it to be. Time passed by gradually. The great ceremony entered a strange pause. The virtuous sage of heaven did not do anything more, and everyone who participated in the ceremony within the capital city waited silently. Only the powers of bloodlines, cultivations, souls, and life force drained from the outsiders continued to accumulate above the capital city. Even though the outsiders among the Dark Star race were not powerful, there were a great number of them, so when so many people's powers were gathered together, the total amount was extremely formidable. From afar, the tremendous energy gathered in the sky above the capital city had already become an ocean, giving off a great pressure. The pressure was so powerful that even many primordial realm experts of the Dark Star race grew stern. As for the godhood cultivators in the capital city below, they were fear-stricken. All of them were filled with terror. Finally, when as much as 70% of all the power in the outsiders had been drained, the devouring formations finally seemed to reach saturation. The 37 formations stopped operating at the same time. Only then did the virtuous sage of heaven finally proceed with the next step. He turned towards the statue of the Grand Exalt and bowed deeply, calling out, "Please bestow us with the blood ancestor." The virtuous sage of heaven's voice was extremely loud, clear, and resonant. It shook up the Dark Star world, even causing the laws in the Dark Star world to ripple. In the next moment, the space before the statue's chest blurred. A drop of blood only the size of a rain droplet appeared out of nowhere. The blood contained unimaginable power, and it possessed an unfathomable presence of laws. With the appearance of the blood, the entire Dark Star world began to churn. The laws of the world all manifested, weaving into chains of order in the surroundings. Everyone from the Dark Star race experienced a pressure so tremendous that they could not even think of opposing when the blood appeared. The pressure suppressed their bloodlines, cultivations, and even their souls, as well as all of their dignity. It forced them to bow towards the droplet of blood involuntarily. This is a Grand Exalt's essence blood. This is a droplet of essence blood left behind by the Grand Exalt of the Dark Star race. Jianchen stared at the blood that gave off a vast pressure from the top of the fifth divine hall. His mind shook as his heart surged wildly. Never did he think a Grand Exalt's essence blood would actually exist among the Dark Star race, and the droplet of essence blood had clearly been preserved in a better condition than the droplet of essence blood from the ancient Skywolf. As a result, both its presence of ways and the strength of its bloodline surpassed the ancient Skywolf's essence blood. Of course, this by no means indicated that the Grand Exalt of the Dark Star race was more powerful than the ancient Skywolf, as they were in vastly different conditions when they left behind their essence blood. The Grand Exalt of the Dark Star race had been in his prime when the Grand Exalt of the Wood Spirits killed him. He had also made many arrangements when he was alive, so the essence blood was better preserved. As for the ancient Skywolf, he had left behind his essence blood when he was passing away in meditation. It was possible to tell from the simple dwelling he was using when he left behind his essence blood that the ancient Sky Wolf clearly had not made so many careful arrangements like the Grand Exalt of the Dark Star race, nor did he have so many clansmen consecrating his remains. As a result, after numerous years, his essence blood obviously weakened. Before, I always felt like the virtuous sage of heaven was hiding the most important step of the great ceremony from the 10 divine halls. As it seems, he was hiding this droplet of Grand Exalt's essence blood. Though, surely the Dark Star race isn't planning to use the droplet of essence blood on Sacred Feather? Jian Chen struggled to keep his cool inside. He knew exactly how precious and rare the essence blood of Grand Exalts were. If the Dark Star race were truly going to use the essence blood on Sacred Feather, they would be going all in. But speaking of which, if Sacred Feather merges with this droplet of essence blood, his bloodline might be truly elevated to the level of a first-generation descendant of a Grand Exalt. If that's the case, then everything the Dark Star race did before was just preparatory work for Sacred Feather to merge with a droplet of essence blood. That's a Grand Exalt's essence blood after all. If you want to forcefully absorb it, you'll probably need a cultivation at Grand Prime at the very least. It'll be completely absurd for Sacred Feather to absorb the Grand Exalt's essence blood with his previous cultivation at God King. As a result, they had to find a way to make up for this, which was to modify Sacred Feather's bloodline into one that belongs to the Dark Star race before using the identity of a member of the Dark Star race to absorb the essence blood. As such, they achieve the effect of the two bloodlines sharing the same origin. That way, the rejection from the Grand Exalt's essence blood will be minimized. At the same time, it can further strengthen Sacred Feather's bloodline and body such that the power he'll inherit when merging with the Grand Exalt's essence blood will increase vastly. Jian Chen's eyes lit up. Merging with a droplet of a Grand Exalt's essence blood and being assisted and refined by a formation personally under the control of the virtuous sage of heaven was basically a colossal fortuitous encounter for Sacred Feather. It's a fortuitous encounter, followed by certain doom. Whether Sacred Feather can stop before certain doom will be entirely up to me, thought Jian Chen. He was already sitting on the edge of his seat now, gazing at Sacred Feather nervously and eagerly. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.